Rain pounded against the windshield of my Honda Accord as I pulled over to the curb, the blue dot on my phone indicating my passenger should be waiting right here, another late-night pickup in downtown Boston. Another drunk college kid or overworked business type who'd missed the last train home. At least that's what I expected. I'd been driving for Uber for about 8 months now, ever since I lost my job at the publishing house. Budget cuts, they said. Restructuring. All the usual bullshit that means we don't need you anymore. So here I was, 34 years old, with an English degree gathering dust and a car payment that wouldn't wait for my next career break. The app pinged. Richard M. had arrived. I squinted through the rain-streaked window and saw a figure standing under the awning of what used to be a bookstore. He wore a long black coat that seemed to absorb what little light came from the street lamps. His face was shadowed under an umbrella, but even from here, I could tell he was watching me, not looking at his phone like most passengers. Just watching. "Hey, Richard?" I called out as he approached the car, following protocol like always. The man nodded and slid into the back seat. A waft of something strange came with him. Not alcohol or cigarettes, but something chemical, almost medicinal. "Evening," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Are you Daniel?" "That's me. Heading to Somerville, right?" The man nodded, closing his umbrella and setting it beside him. Up close, I could see he was older than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair cut close to his scalp and pale blue eyes that seemed to reflect light like a cat's. His face was gaunt, but composed. "Bad night to be out," I said, pulling away from the curb. Small talk was part of the job, though I'd learned to read when passengers weren't in the mood. Richard didn't respond immediately. In the rearview mirror, I saw him staring at the back of my head with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You've been driving long?" he finally asked. "About 8 months," I replied, focusing on the road as we hit a particularly deep puddle. "Not too long then, new enough." Something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I chalked it up to the late hour and the dreary weather. "I suppose so," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Still learning the ropes." "Yes," Richard said. "That's good. That's very good." We drove in silence for several minutes. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the car. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, squeaking slightly on every arc. "You pick up many passengers at this hour?" Richard asked suddenly. "A fair few. College town, you know. Always someone needing a ride." "And you don't mind? The late nights, the strangers in your car?" I glanced in the rearview mirror again. Richard was leaning forward slightly, those pale eyes fixed on mine in the mirror. "It pays the bills," I said, trying to sound casual. "Plus, most people are just trying to get home, same as anyone." "Most people," Richard repeated, leaning back. "Yes, most." We turned onto a quieter street. The buildings here older. No neon signs or late-night convenience stores. Just rows of darkened windows and the occasional porch light. Somerville was just across the river from Boston, proper, older, quieter in parts. Richard's destination was in one of those quieter pockets. "Have you ever had a passenger you were afraid of, Daniel?" Richard asked. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Can't say that I have. Been lucky, I guess." Richard made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Luck, yes, some call it that." We were approaching his destination now. A corner house set back from the street behind a wrought iron fence. No lights were on, and the place had the unmistakable air of neglect. Peeling paint, overgrown garden. "Here we are," I said, pulling to a stop. Richard didn't move to get out. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed a folded piece of paper. "I'd like to give you something," he said, holding it out between two long, pale fingers. "Oh, tips can be added in the app," I started to say. "This isn't money," Richard interrupted. "It's something far more valuable. Knowledge. Protection." Against my better judgment, I took the paper. It was heavy, almost like parchment, and folded into thirds. "What is it?" "Rules," Richard said simply. "For driving at night. For picking up passengers like me." "Rules?" I repeated, feeling a mixture of confusion and unease. "Open it later. When you're home. When you're safe," Richard said. finally opening the car door. The sound of rain rushed in. "Follow them, Daniel. Even the ones that seem strange. Especially those ones." Before I could respond, he'd stepped out into the rain, not bothering with his umbrella. I watched as he walked not toward the dilapidated house, but around the corner and out of sight. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, the paper cold between my fingers. My instinct was to toss it, to chalk the whole interaction up to a weird but harmless encounter with an eccentric. Boston was full of characters, after all. But I didn't. Instead, I tucked the paper into my jacket pocket and pulled away from the curb, already thinking about my bed and how good it would feel after this strange long night. When I finally made it back to my apartment in Allston, it was nearly 3 a.m. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under the streetlights, puddles reflecting the world like broken mirrors. I trudged up the stairs to my third-floor walk-up, barely awake enough to get my key in the lock. My apartment was small but mine. A one-bedroom with just enough room for the basics. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and was halfway to the bedroom when I remembered the paper in my pocket. I pulled it out and stared at it, turning it over in my hands. Nothing written on the outside, just folded parchment-like paper that felt too substantial to be ordinary. "What the hell?" I muttered, unfolding it. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, was a list. 10 items, numbered, written in what looked like black ink. Rules for night drivers. 1. Never pick up a passenger who's standing directly under a streetlight. 2. If a passenger enters your car without using the app, do not panic. Drive as instructed, but do not engage in conversation. 3. If a passenger asks you if you're one of them, answer no, regardless of what them might mean. 4. If the GPS tries to route you through the tunnels after midnight, override it. Take surface streets only. 5. Never stop at a red light if there are no other cars visible in any direction. 6. If a passenger asks to borrow your phone, refuse. If they insist, end the ride immediately. 7. If you see more than 3 identical black cars in a row, take the next right turn available. 8. If a passenger leaves something in your car, do not touch it with your bare hands. Do not return it to lost and found. 9. If you hear weeping from your trunk, do not investigate alone. Drive to a public place with witnesses. 10. If you pick up a passenger and they claim to be the author of these rules, start counting backwards from 100. Do not stop, no matter what they say or do. At the bottom, in slightly smaller letters, break these rules at your own peril. Pass them on when you find someone worthy. I stared at the list, reading it over twice more. It had to be a joke, or the ramblings of someone unwell. And yet, something about the precise handwriting, the serious tone, made the back of my neck prickle. I folded the paper back up and tossed it onto my counter. Probably just a weird passenger getting his kicks by freaking out his Uber driver. I'd had stranger encounters. Still, as I lay in bed that night, Richard's pale eyes and quiet voice kept returning to me. "Follow them, Daniel. Even the ones that seem strange, especially those ones." I told myself I'd throw the list away in the morning, but even as I drifted off to sleep, some part of me knew I wouldn't. Part 2. I didn't work the next day. Instead, I spent it catching up on laundry, paying bills, and pretending that the folded piece of paper on my counter didn't exist. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that the strange passenger had been nothing more than an eccentric with an odd sense of humor. Almost. But when my alarm went off at 7 p.m., signaling the start of my night shift, I found myself picking up the list and reading it again. In the light of day, the rules seemed even more absurd. Never stop at a red light if there are no other cars? Drive only on surface streets after midnight? I'd be breaking traffic laws and tanking my driver rating. Ridiculous, I muttered, folding the paper and slipping it into my jacket pocket anyway. By 8 p.m., I was back in my car, the Uber app online, and waiting for my first ping of the night. It came quickly, a pickup at a restaurant in Back Bay. Standard Friday night fare. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I shuttled couples to and from dinner reservations, dropped off groups of friends at bars, picked up an exhausted-looking nurse from her hospital shift. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. It wasn't until just after midnight that I got a ping that made me hesitate. The pickup location was on the outskirts of the city, in an industrial area that I knew would be mostly deserted at this hour. But the surge pricing was good, and I needed the money. As I approached the pickup location, I saw a lone figure standing on the corner. A woman in a red dress, her hair blowing slightly in the breeze. She was standing directly under a streetlight. Rule number 1 floated through my mind. Never pick up a passenger who's standing directly under a streetlight. Don't be stupid, I said aloud to myself. It's just a list. Just some weirdo's idea of a joke. I pulled up to the curb. The woman approached my car, her heels clicking on the pavement. She was stunning. Perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, a dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. "Emily?" I asked, following protocol. She smiled, and something about that smile made my stomach clench. It was too wide somehow. Too many teeth. "Yes, that's me," she said, sliding into the back seat. Her voice was melodic, but flat, like a recording of someone speaking. "Thank you for coming all the way out here." "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are we headed?" "The Harborside Tunnel, please." I glanced at my GPS. The route highlighted was indeed through the Harbor Tunnel. Something about Rule 4 nagged at me. If the GPS tries to route you through the tunnels after midnight, override it. Take surface streets only. Actually, I heard myself saying, there's some construction in the tunnel tonight. Might be faster to take Atlantic Avenue instead. Emily's expression didn't change, but I felt a sudden drop in temperature inside the car. "I specifically need to go through the tunnel," she said, her voice still pleasant, but now underlined with something hard. "Sorry, but the app is showing major delays there." I lied, tapping my phone screen as if confirming something. We'd be sitting in traffic for an hour. For a long moment, Emily said nothing. In the rearview mirror, I could see her staring at me, that too wide smile now gone. Her eyes seemed darker somehow. The pupils expanded until there was almost no iris visible. "Fine," she finally said. "Atlantic Avenue, then." I tried to keep my hands from shaking as I changed the route on the GPS. The surface route would take about 15 minutes longer, but something inside me was screaming that it was worth it. We drove in silence for several minutes. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional taxi or late-night reveler. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but Emily was staring out the window now, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights. "Do you drive a lot of night shifts?" she asked suddenly, her eyes snapping back to mine in the mirror. "Most nights, yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And do you find that people are different at night?" I swallowed hard. "How do you mean?" Emily leaned forward slightly. I could smell her perfume now, something floral but with an underlying note that reminded me of raw meat. "I mean, do you ever pick up passengers who seem not quite right?" My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "I meet all kinds of people in this job." "I'm sure you do," Emily said, and that too wide smile was back. "Are you one of them, Daniel?" Rule number 3 hit me like a physical blow. If a passenger asks you if you're one of them, answer no, regardless of what them might mean. "No," I said immediately, the word coming out more forcefully than I intended. "No, I'm not." Emily sat back, the smile fading. "No," she repeated softly. I didn't think so. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. I took the surface streets as planned, winding through the city instead of cutting under the harbor. Every few minutes, I'd catch Emily watching me in the mirror, her expression unreadable. When we finally reached her destination, a high-rise apartment building overlooking the harbor, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Here we are," I said, pulling up to the entrance. Emily didn't move to get out. "You have something, don't you?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Something he gave you." My blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Yes, you do. I can smell it on you. His rules. His warnings." I said nothing, frozen in place. Emily leaned forward until her face was inches from the back of my headrest. I could feel her breath on my neck. "They won't save you," she whispered. "Not for long. We find all of you eventually." Then she was gone, the car door closing with a soft click. I watched as she walked into the building, never looking back. I sat there for a full minute, heart hammering in my chest, before I finally pulled away from the curb. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. Maybe Richard and Emily knew each other. Maybe this was some elaborate prank being played on random Uber drivers. But as I drove home, the rules burning a hole in my pocket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just narrowly avoided something terrible, and that whatever I'd avoided was still out there, waiting. When I finally crawled into bed at 4 a.m., I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's too wide smile, heard her whispered words. "We find all of you eventually." I took out the list and read it again, my eyes lingering on rules I hadn't even thought about yet. If you hear weeping from your trunk, do not investigate alone. If you see more than 3 identical black cars in a row, take the next right turn available. What the hell had Richard gotten me into? More importantly, what would happen if I broke the rules? Part 3. I didn't work the next night, or the night after that. I called in sick to my other part-time job at the bookstore and spent 2 days in my apartment, blinds drawn, jumping at every sound. I knew I was being irrational, but I couldn't shake the encounter with Emily. Her words kept replaying in my mind. "We find all of you eventually." By the 3rd day, reality set in. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and I needed the money from driving. I couldn't hide in my apartment forever because of some strange coincidences and a creepy passenger. I had to get back on the road, but I wasn't going in blind. Not this time. I spent that afternoon researching. First, I looked up Richard M., trying to find the passenger who'd given me the list. The app didn't store passenger information for longer than necessary, and all I had was a first name and last initial. Unsurprisingly, I came up empty. Next, I searched for anything related to strange rules for drivers, urban legends about Uber, even occult rituals involving cars or transportation. I found plenty of creepypasta stories and Reddit threads, but nothing that matched what I was experiencing. Finally, I turned to driver forums. If other drivers had encountered anything similar, surely they'd have discussed it. I spent hours scrolling through posts about difficult passengers, navigation hacks, and earning strategies. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up, I found it. A thread from 3 years ago titled, "Anyone else get the list?" It had been started by a driver in Chicago, but had only a handful of replies before being locked by moderators for promoting paranoia. The original poster claimed to have received a set of rules from a passenger and had experienced unexplainable things when breaking them. The few replies were a mix of skepticism and dark humor. One commenter wrote, "Sounds like you picked up a schizo, bro." Another said, "I wish my passengers would give me something interesting instead of just puking in my back seat." But one reply caught my attention. A user named NightDriver427 had written, "Delete this post. It's real. Contact me privately if you need help." The account had been deleted. I sat back in my chair, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Confirmation that whatever was happening to me had happened to at least one other driver. That night, I returned to work. The list was folded in my pocket, and I'd committed all 10 rules to memory. I wasn't taking any chances. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I picked up college students, bar hoppers, a couple heading home from a late dinner. I avoided passengers standing under streetlights, though there weren't many at this hour anyway. Around 1 a.m., I got a ping for a pickup at a hotel downtown. The passenger's name was Alex K., and the destination was a residential address in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside the city. I arrived at the hotel and spotted a man waiting at the curb, scrolling through his phone. He wasn't under a streetlight, which I took as a good sign. "Alex?" I called out as he approached. He nodded, a friendly smile on his face. "That's me. You must be Daniel." Alex appeared to be in his early 30s, with brown hair and glasses, wearing a business suit that looked rumpled from a long day. He seemed perfectly normal as he climbed into the back seat. "Long day?" I asked, pulling away from the curb. "The longest," Alex sighed. "Conference all day, client dinner all night. I'm dead on my feet." We chatted casually as I navigated through the quiet streets. Alex was a software developer in town for a tech conference. He was from Minneapolis, had 2 kids, and hated being away from home. Completely ordinary. As we approached the edge of downtown, the GPS prompted me to enter the Storrow Tunnel, a shortcut that would save us about 10 minutes. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If the GPS tries to route you through the tunnels after midnight, override it. "Mind if we take the scenic route?" I asked, already preparing to override the GPS. "The tunnels get congested this time of night, even with less traffic." Alex frowned slightly. "Really? At 1 a.m.? "Construction," I said quickly. "They do most of the work overnight." Alex shrugged. "You're the driver. Whatever gets me to bed faster." I rerouted us along the surface streets, relief washing over me. 2 rules followed, no consequences. Maybe I was being paranoid after all. We were about halfway to Brookline when I stopped at a red light. It was a major intersection, but at this hour, it was completely deserted. No cars visible in any direction. Rule 5. Never stop at a red light if there are no other cars visible in any direction. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Alex was looking out the window, seemingly lost in thought. The light was still red. No cars coming from any direction. My foot hovered over the gas pedal. It felt wrong to run a red light, against everything I'd been taught as a driver. But the rule. "Everything okay?" Alex asked, noticing my hesitation. "Yeah, fine," I said, making a split-second decision. I pressed down on the gas and drove through the red light. "Whoa," Alex said, eyebrows raising. "Living dangerously, huh?" "Sorry," I muttered. "It's late, and there's no one around." Alex chuckled. "No judgment here. I've done worse." We continued on, the moment passing without incident. Maybe I really was overreacting. Maybe the list was just the ramblings of an eccentric passenger, and Emily had been playing along with some weird joke. We were about 5 minutes from Alex's destination when he spoke again. "Hey, sorry to ask, but my phone just died. Could I borrow yours to make a quick call? I need to let my Airbnb host know I'm on my way." Rule 6 hit me like a punch to the gut. If a passenger asks to borrow your phone, refuse. If they insist, end the ride immediately. "Sorry," I said, trying to sound casual. "Company policy. We're not supposed to lend out our phones. It'll just take a second," Alex insisted. "It's kind of important." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I really can't. Sorry." Alex was quiet for a moment. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression had changed. The friendly smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I need your phone, Daniel," he said, his voice lower now, with a strange resonance that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Give it to me." Rule 6, second part. If they insist, end the ride immediately. With my heart pounding in my chest, I pulled over to the curb. "I think we're done here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'll need to find another ride." Alex didn't move. In the mirror, I saw his eyes fixed on mine, and they seemed darker now, like Emily's had. The temperature in the car seemed to drop several degrees. "End the ride, Daniel," he said softly. "End it, and see what happens." My finger hovered over the end ride button on my phone. I was scared, but I was also angry. Whatever game these people were playing, I was tired of it. I pressed the button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then Alex smiled, and it was that same too-wide smile I'd seen on Emily. "Bad choice," he whispered. Suddenly, the interior lights in my car went out, all of them, at once. The dashboard, the headlights, even the screen of my phone. We were plunged into complete darkness. I heard movement from the back seat, a rustling sound followed by what sounded like bones cracking. The smell hit me next, like burnt hair and rotting meat. "What the hell?" I gasped, fumbling for the door handle. "We find all of you eventually," Alex's voice said. But it didn't sound human anymore. It was deeper, raspier, like several voices speaking at once. I finally got the door open and practically fell out onto the street. Behind me, I heard more movement, more cracking sounds. Without looking back, I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, sprinting down the deserted street without any destination in mind, just away from my car, away from whatever Alex had become. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself in a well-lit commercial area with a 24-hour diner on the corner. Lights, people, safety. I staggered into the diner and collapsed into a booth, earning concerned looks from the few late-night patrons and the waitress behind the counter. "You okay, hon?" the waitress asked, approaching with a pot of coffee. "Car trouble," I managed to say. "Can I use your phone? I need to call a ride." She handed me the diner's cordless phone, and I called the only person I knew would be awake at this hour, my friend Mike, who worked night shifts at a hospital nearby. While I waited for Mike to arrive, I tried to process what had happened. Had I actually seen anything in the darkness of my car? Or had my mind, primed by the rules and my encounter with Emily, conjured up something that wasn't there? But I couldn't explain the lights going out, all of them simultaneously. That wasn't in my head. When Mike arrived 20 minutes later, I was still shaking. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked as I climbed into his car. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I muttered. "Can you take me home? I'll explain on the way." I didn't explain, though. How could I? I barely understood it myself. Instead, I asked him to drive past where I'd left my car. It was gone. "You sure this is the right street?" Mike asked, cruising slowly down the empty road. "Positive," I said, a fresh wave of unease washing over me. "I left it right here." "Maybe it got towed," Mike suggested. "Or stolen. Should we call the cops?" I shook my head. Something told me that involving the police would only make things worse. "No, I'll deal with it tomorrow. Just take me home." Back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table. The list spread out before me, reading it over and over. 3 rules followed, no consequences. 1 rule broken, and what? What exactly had I seen? What had happened to my car? As dawn broke, my phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello, Daniel," said a familiar voice. "Richard, I see you've been learning." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "What was in my car last night? Where is my car now?" "Your car is where you left it," Richard said calmly. "As for what was in it, let's just say you had a close call. The first of many, I suspect." "I want answers," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "Real answers. And you'll get them," Richard replied. "But not all at once. Knowledge is dangerous, Daniel. Too much too quickly can break a mind." "Cut the cryptic bullshit," I snapped. "Who are you? Who are they? What's happening to me?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then Richard sighed, a sound so human and tired that it momentarily threw me. "Check your email," he finally said. "I've sent you an address. Come alone, tomorrow night at midnight. No earlier, no later." The line went dead. I checked my email, and sure enough, there was a message from an anonymous address containing only a street address in Cambridge and the words, "Midnight. Come alone." I had a day to decide if I was going to meet Richard and get answers, or try to forget any of this had happened. But deep down, I knew there was only one choice. I was already too far down the rabbit hole, and something told me there was no climbing back out. Part 4. The address Richard had sent me belonged to an old bookstore in Cambridge, tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. "Dusty Books," the faded sign read. By day, it probably looked quaint and inviting. By night, with its darkened windows and peeling paint, it had all the charm of a mausoleum. I'd spent the day in a state of anxious preparation. First, I'd gone to where I'd abandoned my car, half expecting it to be gone. To my surprise, it was exactly where I'd left it, parked neatly at the curb as if nothing had happened. The interior was spotless. No smell, no damage, nothing to suggest anything unusual had occurred. Even the lights worked perfectly. I'd also done more research. digging deeper into driver forums, and even venturing into some of the darker corners of the internet where people discuss the occult and paranormal. I found fragments that seemed relevant. Stories of night people who preyed on the unwary, warnings about certain roads after dark, tales of drivers who disappeared without a trace. Nothing concrete, nothing that formed a complete picture, but enough to convince me I wasn't simply losing my mind. Now, as the clock on my phone ticked to 11:58 p.m., I stood across the street from the bookstore watching. No lights visible inside, no movement. Just an ordinary closed shop on a quiet street. At precisely midnight, I crossed the street and tried the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. A small bell tinkled overhead as I entered, making me jump. The interior was dark except for a single reading lamp on a desk at the back of the store. Behind the desk sat Richard, exactly as I remembered him. Silver hair, pale eyes, gaunt face. He was reading a large, leather-bound book that he closed as I approached. "You came," he said, not sounding particularly surprised. "Good." "Not like I had much choice," I replied, staying near the door. "Not after what happened." Richard gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit, please. We have much to discuss." I hesitated, then took the seat. The bookstore smelled of old paper and dust, with an underlying note of something else. Candle wax, perhaps, or incense. "Let me guess," I said. "You're going to tell me that monsters are real, that they're disguising themselves as Uber passengers, and that your list is the only thing keeping me safe." A small smile touched Richard's lips. "Not quite, though you're closer than you might think." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "What do you know about thresholds, Daniel?" "Thresholds? Like doorways?" "Precisely. Like doorways. Boundaries between one space and another. In most human cultures, thresholds have power. They're liminal spaces. Neither here nor there. Neither one thing nor another." I shifted in my seat. "What does this have to do with what's happening to me?" "Everything," Richard said simply. "Your car is a threshold of sorts. Not fixed in place like a doorway, but mobile, transient. A bubble of private space that moves through public space. And in that movement, it creates opportunities." "Opportunities for what?" Richard's pale eyes fixed on mine. "For crossing over, for those who wish to move between worlds." I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You're talking about aliens now? Parallel dimensions?" "Nothing so science fiction," Richard replied calmly. "I'm talking about the spaces between what you know and what you don't. The cracks in reality that have always been there, that humans have always known about and feared, even if they called them by different names in different times." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk to me. Inside were newspaper clippings, dozens of them, spanning what looked like decades. Missing persons reports, all featuring taxi drivers, rideshare drivers, chauffeurs. "These people," Richard said quietly, "all encountered what you might call the wrong passenger. Some disappeared entirely. Others were found, but changed. Speaking in tongues, suffering from delusions, or simply catatonic." I flipped through the clippings, a chill running down my spine. Many of the stories were from Boston and the surrounding areas, but there were others from across the country, across the world. "Why drivers?" I asked, closing the folder. "Why us?" As I said, thresholds. Moving thresholds are powerful, unpredictable. They create openings. Richard leaned back in his chair. "And there are beings who seek such openings. Beings who cannot normally interact with our world, but who can slip through under the right circumstances. And the rules? They're what? Some kind of protection spell?" Richard shook his head. "Not magic. Experience. Hard-won knowledge passed from driver to driver. Ways to avoid creating the circumstances these beings need." "Who are you in all this?" I asked. "How do you know these things?" A shadow passed over Richard's face. "I was a driver once, 40 years ago. Taxi, not Uber, but the principle is the same. I had an encounter. I survived, which is more than many can say. And I've been studying, learning, warning others ever since. I thought of the rules, how specific they were. The red lights, the tunnels, the phone. These all create openings somehow? Yes. Tunnels are transitions, compounded thresholds. Red lights where you're alone. Moments of suspension, of waiting in nothingness. A stranger using your personal device. A connection, an invitation. Richard's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing traffic patterns rather than supernatural threats. And ending the ride with whatever Alex was? A severance. A breaking of bonds at the worst possible moment. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're fortunate to be sitting here, Daniel. Few survive such an encounter. I thought back to that night. The darkness, the smell, the voice that wasn't human anymore. What was he? What would have happened if I hadn't run? Richard was quiet for a long moment. There are names for them in various traditions. Hungry ones, hollow people, passengers. He paused. They feed on fear, on life itself. A driver, alone in a car at night, is an ideal vessel. Isolated, vulnerable, trapped in a moving threshold with nowhere to run. And they look human? They can pass as human? Most of the time, yes. But there are tells if you know what to look for. The smile that's too wide, eyes that reflect light like an animal's, a voice that resonates strangely. Richard tapped the folder. That's why the rules exist, to help you avoid them, or at least detect them before it's too late. My head was spinning. Part of me still wanted to dismiss all of this as the delusions of a disturbed mind. But I'd seen Alex change. I'd heard that voice. I couldn't deny my own experiences. The list, I said, pulling it from my pocket. You said to pass it on when I found someone worthy. What did you mean? Exactly that. Knowledge is power, Daniel, but it's also responsibility. Not everyone can handle knowing what lurks in the spaces between. Some break. Some use the knowledge wrongly. Richard gestured to the clippings. Some become hunted, specifically because they know. Like I am now, I said, the realization settling heavily in my gut. Richard nodded. They're aware of you now. They'll be watching, waiting for you to make mistakes. The rules will help, but they're not infallible. Nothing is. So what do I do? Quit driving? Move to another city? It wouldn't matter, Richard said, shaking his head. They exist everywhere, and once they know you, distance is meaningless to them. No, your best protection now is knowledge, vigilance. He reached into his desk again and pulled out another piece of paper, similar to the list but longer. The complete rules, he said, handing it to me. 20 in total. The first 10 are the essentials. These are refinements, subtleties for specific situations. I took the paper, noting the same precise handwriting as the original list. Why didn't you give me all of them to begin with? I asked. Would you have believed them? Or would you have dismissed it all as the ravings of a madman? Richard's expression was knowing. Sometimes people need to experience to believe. I couldn't argue with that. 3 days ago, I would have thrown away the entire list and forgotten all about it. There's one more thing, Richard said, his tone growing more serious. A warning. There are others who know about these beings. People who serve them, worship them, seek their favor. Humans? Working with these things? Richard nodded grimly. Cultists, for lack of a better term. They identify drivers who've received the rules and target them specifically. They see us as threats to their gods. How do I identify them? I asked, feeling a new wave of paranoia washing over me. They're more difficult to spot than the entities themselves. They're fully human, after all. Richard frowned. But they often have a mark. A tattoo or brand on the inside of their left wrist. A circle with 3 vertical lines through it. I made a mental note to check wrists from now on. Anything else I should know? Richard stood up, signaling that our meeting was coming to an end. Trust no one who knows about the rules without proving themselves first. Even me, he smiled thinly. Especially me. How do I contact you if I need to? I asked, rising from my chair. You don't, Richard said simply. From here, you're on your own. That's how it works. He walked me to the door of the bookstore. As he opened it, letting in the cool night air, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Daniel. Be vigilant. And when the time comes, pass on what you know to someone who will use it wisely." He paused. "And remember, you're not alone in this knowledge, even if it feels that way. There are others out there, following the same rules, fighting the same battles." With that cryptic reassurance, he ushered me out into the night and closed the door behind me. When I turned back, the lights in the bookstore were already out. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the extended list heavy in my pocket, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. Part of me still wanted to dismiss it all as elaborate fiction, a prank, a shared delusion. But deep down, I knew better. The world had changed for me, or rather my understanding of it had. The comfortable boundaries between real and unreal, possible and impossible, had blurred. And I was left standing in the space between, armed only with a set of rules on parchment paper and the growing certainty that my life would never be the same. As I walked back to my car, I found myself checking the shadows, avoiding streetlights, scanning the faces of the few people still out at this hour. Vigilance, Richard had said. My new normal. I didn't know if I was ready for what lay ahead, but I knew there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. Part 5. The next week passed in a blur of hypervigilance and paranoia. I followed all 20 rules religiously, which meant fundamentally changing how I drove. I avoided tunnels after midnight, never stopped at deserted red lights, took seemingly random right turns when I spotted too many identical cars, and scrutinized every passenger with newfound suspicion. My rating took a hit. Several passengers complained about erratic driving or bizarre behavior. One even reported that I'd refused to stop at red lights, which earned me a warning from Uber. But I didn't care. Let them complain. Let them give me 1 star. At least I was alive. The expanded list Richard had given me included more specific situations to avoid. 11. If a passenger asks to be taken to an address that doesn't exist on your GPS, refuse the ride. 12. Never pick up more passengers than requested in the app, even if they claim to be friends of the original passenger. 13. If your car radio turns on by itself, turn it off immediately. If it turns on a second time, end the ride and exit the vehicle for at least 10 minutes. 14. Do not drive past cemeteries between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. 15. If a passenger leaves behind a personal item, jewelry, watch, etc., place it in a container of salt water for 24 hours before touching it directly. 16. Never agree to take a detour if the new route crosses railroad tracks more than once. 17. If you see a pedestrian waving for you to stop in an area with no houses or businesses, do not slow down or acknowledge them. 18. Do not pick up passengers whose destination is more than 60 miles away after 2 a.m. 19. If your car begins to feel noticeably heavier while driving, open all windows immediately and turn on bright interior lights. 20. If a passenger asks if you hear them too, exit the vehicle as soon as safely possible and do not return for at least 1 hour. Some seemed bizarre, others disturbingly specific, as if written in response to particular incidents. I didn't want to imagine what kinds of encounters had led to these rules. On Friday night, 1 week after meeting Richard, I picked up a passenger named Lauren from a bar in Fenway. She was in her 20s, slightly drunk but coherent, and wanted to go to an address in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood about 15 minutes away. "Long night?" I asked as she settled into the back seat. "The longest," she replied with a sigh. "Work party. Had to show up. You know how it is." We chatted casually as I drove. Lauren worked in marketing, hated her boss, loved her apartment, except for the noisy neighbors above. Normal conversation, normal passenger. About halfway to her destination, she leaned forward. "Hey, do you mind taking a different route? There's this convenience store on Center Street that's open late. I desperately need some Advil for the headache that's coming." I checked the GPS. The detour wouldn't cross any railroad tracks, and the store she mentioned was legitimate. I'd passed it many times. "Sure, no problem," I said, making the turn. As we approached the convenience store, I noticed Lauren checking her phone repeatedly, frowning. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just weird text from a friend," she muttered. "Can you wait while I run in? It'll just take a minute." I nodded, pulling up to the curb. Lauren hurried into the store, and I watched as she went straight to the counter, speaking animatedly to the clerk. Something felt off. I glanced around the quiet street, suddenly uneasy. That's when I noticed the car parked across the street, a black sedan with tinted windows. As I watched, the driver's side window rolled down slightly, just enough for me to glimpse the driver. Even from this distance, I could see he was watching me. My instincts screamed danger. I remembered Richard's warning about cultists targeting drivers who knew the rules. Had they found me already? Was Lauren one of them? I checked her destination again. It was a real address, as far as I could tell. Nothing suspicious there. But the car across the street, the way Lauren had been checking her phone. Before I could decide what to do, Lauren emerged from the store, a small bag in hand. She climbed back into the car. "Thanks for waiting," she said. "Just needed some painkillers and water." I nodded, pulling away from the curb. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the black sedan's lights come on. "No problem," I said, trying to sound casual. "Straight to your place now?" "Actually," Lauren said, her tone changing slightly, "I just got a text from my roommate. She locked herself out and needs me to meet her at this other address first. It's not far." Rule 11. If a passenger asks to be taken to an address that doesn't exist on your GPS, refuse the ride. "What's the address?" I asked, my guard fully up now. Lauren gave me an address on a street I knew well. I plugged it into the GPS, half expecting it not to register. But it did. A real location, about 5 minutes away. "No problem," I said, changing our route. As we drove, I kept an eye on the rearview mirror. The black sedan was still behind us, keeping a consistent distance. Not close enough to be obviously following, but never more than a few cars back. Lauren was quiet now, staring out the window, occasionally checking her phone. I noticed she was wearing long sleeves, despite the warm evening. Was she hiding something on her wrist? A mark, like Richard had described? We turned onto a residential street lined with triple-decker houses, typical of Boston's outer neighborhoods. The address Lauren had given me appeared to be one of these houses, lights on in several windows. Nothing obviously suspicious. But as I pulled up to the curb, I noticed the black sedan turning onto the street behind us. "Here we are," I said, stopping the car but keeping the engine running. Lauren didn't move to get out. "Actually," she said, her voice different now, harder, more focused. "I need you to drive around back, to the alley." There were alarm bells going off in my head now. "Sorry, this is the address you gave me. I can't drive into alleys. Insurance reasons." Lauren's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. There was no hint of drunkenness in them now. "I know what you have, Daniel," she said quietly. "The list, the rules. We need to talk about it." My blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." She smiled, and while it wasn't the too wide smile of Emily or Alex, there was something predatory in it. "Yes, you do. Richard gave it to you, didn't he? At the bookstore?" I said nothing, my hand inching toward the door handle. "We're not going to hurt you," Lauren continued. "We want to help you. Richard doesn't tell the whole truth. There are things you need to know." "Who's we?" I demanded. In answer, Lauren rolled up her left sleeve, revealing her wrist. There it was. The symbol Richard had described. A circle with 3 vertical lines through it, tattooed in black ink. "We're the Watchers," she said. "We monitor the boundaries, keep the balance." "You're cultists," I spat. "Working for those things." Lauren's expression hardened. "Is that what Richard told you? That we worship them? Serve them?" "Typical." She shook her head. "We don't serve them, Daniel. We contain them. But we need to understand them to do that. And drivers like you, marked drivers, are crucial to that understanding." I didn't believe her. Couldn't believe her. "So what? You want to study me? Experiment on me?" "We want to talk to you," Lauren said. "Just talk. There's so much Richard didn't tell you. So much you need to know if you're going to survive." Outside, the black sedan had parked across the street. The driver was still inside, watching. "Your friend out there doesn't look like he just wants to talk," I said. "Protection," Lauren replied. "Nothing more. The entities know about us too. They hunt us as much as they hunt you." I was trapped in an impossible situation. If Lauren was telling the truth, I could be turning away vital information, allies in whatever supernatural conflict I'd been drafted into. If she was lying, I could be delivering myself into the hands of people who serve the very creatures I was trying to avoid. "Prove it," I finally said. "Prove you're not working for them." Lauren seemed to consider this for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather-bound book. She handed it to me. "This is our codex," she said. "Our version of the rules, but with explanations. Theories about what these entities are, where they come from, how they operate. Take it. Read it. If you want to talk after that, call the number on the last page." I hesitated, then took the book. It was old, the leather cracked and worn, the pages yellowed. Why give me this, if it's so valuable? Because knowledge is the only real weapon in this fight? Lauren said simply. And because we need drivers like you, aware drivers. The entities are becoming more active, more aggressive. Something's changing, and we don't know why. I slipped the book into my jacket pocket. "And if I read this and decide you're full of shit?" Lauren shrugged. "Then burn it. Walk away. Try to survive with just Richard's rules to guide you." She opened the car door. "But I don't think you will. You're curious, Daniel. You want to understand what's happening to you. That's why Richard chose you." She stepped out of the car, but leaned back in before closing the door. "One more thing. Don't go back to the bookstore. It's not safe anymore, Richard. Isn't there anymore." Before I could ask what she meant, Lauren closed the door and walked up to the house. The front door opened before she reached it, someone inside waiting for her. She entered, and the door closed behind her. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, the codex heavy in my pocket. Across the street, the black sedan was still watching, waiting to see what I would do. Finally, I pulled away from the curb and drove, not toward my apartment. I didn't want them to know where I lived, if they didn't already. Instead, I drove aimlessly, taking random turns, watching to see if the sedan followed. It didn't, as far as I could tell. After about 20 minutes of paranoid route changing, I felt safe enough to head home. Once inside my apartment, doors locked and blinds drawn, I pulled out the codex and examined it more closely. The cover was simple brown leather with no title or marking. The pages inside were filled with dense, handwritten text in multiple hands, as if compiled by different people over time. Some pages had diagrams, circles with strange symbols, anatomical drawings that didn't quite look human, maps with locations marked in red. I turned to the first page and began to read. The entities that manifest through thresholds are not demons, spirits, or any supernatural beings recognized by human religions or folklore. They are something older, something that exists in the spaces between what we perceive as reality. They have been called many names throughout history. The gentry, the hollow ones, the passengers. But their true nature remains unknown. What we do know is this: they feed on human fear and life energy. They can only fully manifest under specific conditions, and they are bound by certain rules that seem to govern their interaction with our reality. I read for hours, absorbing information that alternately terrified me and fascinated me. The Codex confirmed much of what Richard had told me, but went deeper, offering theories and observations accumulated over decades, possibly centuries. According to the Watchers, the entities existed in a parallel plane that occasionally intersected with ours at certain points, thresholds, as Richard had called them. Moving thresholds, like vehicles, created unpredictable overlaps, making drivers particularly vulnerable. The rules weren't magical or mystical. They were practical guidelines based on observed patterns. The entities seemed bound by limitations when interacting with our world. They couldn't manifest fully in well-lit areas. They couldn't maintain their human disguise when captured on digital media. They couldn't cross certain barriers without invitation. Most disturbing was the chapter on what happened to those taken by the entities. According to the Codex, they weren't simply killed, they were hollowed out. Their bodies returned eventually, but their minds, their souls, whatever made them truly human, was gone. They became vessels, empty shells, used by the entities to move more freely in our world. The final pages describe the Watchers themselves, an organization dating back centuries, dedicated to studying and containing the entities. Not serving them, if the Codex was to be believed, but understanding them well enough to prevent incursions, to maintain the boundaries between worlds. At the very end was a phone number, as Lauren had said, along with a simple message: knowledge is protection. Protection is purpose. We watch so others need not see. By the time I finished reading, dawn was breaking. My mind was racing with new information, new fears, new questions. Who was telling the truth? Richard or the Watchers? Were there truly sides in this conflict? Or was everyone just trying to survive in their own way? I'd been given two versions of reality, both terrifying, both claiming to be the truth. And I had no way to know which, if either, to believe. All I knew for certain was that I was now undeniably caught in the middle of something beyond my understanding, something that had noticed me, something that wasn't going to let me go easily. I tucked the Codex under my mattress and finally fell into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of pale eyes and too wide smiles and thresholds opening onto endless darkness. Part 6. I didn't call the number in the Codex. Not immediately. Instead, I spent the next few days cross-referencing everything I'd read against my own experiences and the fragments of information I could find online. I looked up the locations marked on the maps in the Codex. They were scattered across the country, with a heavy concentration in older cities: Boston, New York, Chicago, New Orleans, San Francisco. I also tried to verify what Lauren had said about Richard. I returned to dusty books during daylight hours, heart pounding as I approached the familiar storefront. The sign still hung above the door, faded and peeling, but the windows were dark, the interior shadowed. A closed sign hung on the door, alongside a newer edition, for lease, with a realtor's contact information. I peered through the glass. The bookshelves were still there, but many were empty now, the remaining books dusty and untouched. The desk where Richard had sat was bare, no lamp, no leather-bound book. I tried the door, locked, of course. I stepped back, taking in the abandoned appearance of the place. Had it been like this all along? Had my midnight meeting with Richard occurred in a store that was already closed, already empty? The thought sent a chill down my spine. What was real anymore? What could I trust? I continued driving for Uber, but only during daylight hours now. I couldn't bring myself to work at night, not with everything I now knew. The daytime shifts were less profitable, but infinitely less stressful. Normal passengers going to normal destinations. No weird requests, no strange behaviors, no rules broken. Or so I thought. It was a Tuesday afternoon, sunny and mild for late autumn in Boston. I'd been driving since 10 a.m., mostly airport runs and business people going to meetings. Around 2 p.m., I got a ping for a pickup at Massachusetts General Hospital. The passenger's name was Maria J., and her destination was an address in Brookline. I arrived at the hospital pickup area and spotted a woman who I assumed was Maria. Mid-30s, wearing scrubs under a light jacket, looking tired but alert in the way that healthcare workers often do after a long shift. "Maria!" I called out as she approached. She nodded, sliding into the back seat with a weary sigh. "Thanks for coming. Been a long day." "No problem," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Heading home from work?" "Finally," she replied with a small smile. 36-hour shift. I'm dead on my feet." We chatted easily as I navigated through midday traffic. Maria was a surgeon, had been at Mass General for 7 years, lived alone with 2 cats. Completely ordinary conversation. As we approached the Harvard Bridge that would take us across the Charles River, I noticed Maria glancing repeatedly at something outside her window. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just thought I saw something," she murmured, then seemed to catch herself. "Sorry, sleep deprivation makes you see things that aren't there." I nodded sympathetically, but a small alarm bell had gone off in my head. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, studying her more carefully. Nothing obviously wrong. No too wide smile, no strange eyes, just a tired doctor heading home after a long shift. We were halfway across the bridge when Maria spoke again. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked, her voice casual but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. "Think about who?" I replied, suddenly hyper-aware of every word, every gesture. "The ones who go missing," she said, still looking out the window at the river below. "The drivers. The ones who pick up the wrong passenger." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. Not in broad daylight, not after I'd been so careful. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maria's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. They were normal, human eyes, tired, with faint lines at the corners. But there was knowledge in them, awareness. "Yes, you do, Daniel," she said quietly. "You have the list. I can tell. You're one of the aware ones." My heart was pounding now. Was she one of them? A cultist? A watcher? Or something else entirely? "Who are you?" I demanded, ready to pull over, to run if necessary. Maria's expression softened. "Someone like you. Someone who knows." She rolled up her left sleeve, revealing her wrist. There was no mark there, no circle with lines. Instead, there was a scar, a jagged, puckered line that ran from her wrist halfway up her forearm. "2 years ago," she said, rolling her sleeve back down, "I picked up a passenger who asked to go to the tunnels. I didn't know the rules then." Didn't know anything. She swallowed hard. "I survived. Barely. But I learned." I studied her in the mirror, looking for any sign of deception. "How did you know about me?" "We recognize each other, don't we? There's a wariness, a way of watching, of calculating exits, escape routes." Maria shrugged. "Plus, you didn't take the tunnel route even though it would have been faster. That's usually a tell." We had crossed the bridge now, entering Cambridge. Normal traffic, normal people on the sidewalks. Nothing threatening in sight. I began to relax, just slightly. "Did Richard find you?" I asked. "Give you the list?" Maria shook her head. "Never met him. My list came from another driver, a woman named Eleanor. She's gone now." A shadow crossed her face. "They found her last month. In her car parked outside a cemetery at 3:30 a.m. She knew better. Something must have compelled her." The thought made me shiver, that these entities could somehow force you to break the rules, to make yourself vulnerable. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because we need to stick together," Maria said simply. "Those of us who know. There aren't many of us, and lately more are disappearing." "The Watchers," I began, then hesitated. "Do you know about them?" Maria's expression darkened. "Stay away from them. They're not what they claim to be." "What do you mean?" "They say they study the entities to contain them, right? To understand them?" Maria shook her head. "What they don't tell you is how they get their information. They sacrifice drivers, aware drivers, to the entities. Set them up to break the rules. Then they observe what happens. The codex, the detailed descriptions of what happened to those taken, had that knowledge been gained through deliberate sacrifice? How do you know this?" I asked. "Eleanor told me before she disappeared. She was approached by them, like you probably were, given their book, their truth." Maria's voice was bitter. "She almost joined them. Then she saw what they really do." We were approaching her destination now, a well-maintained apartment building on a quiet street. I pulled up to the curb, my mind racing with this new information. "So what do we do?" I asked. "If Richard isn't trustworthy, and the Watchers aren't either, who do we turn to?" "Each other," Maria said simply. "The drivers who know. We've started our own network. Small, careful, but growing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. It looked ordinary. Just her name and a phone number. But when she turned it over, I saw a small symbol drawn in the corner. A stylized key. "If you need help, if you encounter something you can't handle alone, call me. Anytime." She handed me the card. "And if I don't answer, call this number instead." She wrote another number on the back of the card. "That's Blake. He's like us. He'll help if he can." I took the card, staring at the simple key symbol. "Why a key?" Maria smiled slightly. "Because that's what we are, key holders. The ones who know how to lock the doors, how to maintain the boundaries." She opened the car door. "Be careful, Daniel. They know about you now. Both the entities and the Watchers. Neither will leave you alone." With that, she stepped out of the car and walked up to her building. Before entering, she turned and gave me a small nod, a gesture of solidarity. Then she was gone. I sat there for a long moment, the card in my hand feeling both like a lifeline and a burden. Another layer of complexity in a situation that was already overwhelming. Richard, the Watchers, and now the key holders. 3 factions, 3 versions of the truth, all claiming to be fighting the same threat, but with wildly different methods and motivations. Who could I trust? Richard, who had given me the rules that had saved my life, but who, according to Lauren, was gone, possibly taken. The Watchers, with their ancient codex and claims of containing the entities, but who, according to Maria, sacrificed drivers for their research. Or the key holders, this new network of aware drivers who seemed to offer mutual protection but whom I knew almost nothing about. I slipped Maria's card into my wallet, next to the folded list of rules. I didn't know who was telling the truth. I didn't know who to trust. But I did know one thing for certain. I was no longer alone in this strange new reality. There were others like me out there. Others who had seen behind the veil and lived to tell about it. Whether that was a comfort or just another layer of fear, I couldn't yet say. Part 7. 3 days after meeting Maria, I received a text from an unknown number. "Richard is gone. The bookstore has been compromised. The Watchers are moving. Be vigilant. L." L for Lauren, I assumed. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence, coming right after I'd visited the bookstore. Were they watching me? Or was it something else, some connection I didn't understand yet? I didn't respond to the text. I didn't know what to say, or who I'd really be talking to. Instead, I called the number Maria had given me. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Daniel, is everything okay?" I told her about the text, about my visit to the bookstore, about my growing sense that I was being watched. "Don't reply," she said immediately. "And change your routine. Different routes to and from home, different grocery stores, different cafes. Make yourself harder to track." "You think they're hunting me specifically?" I asked, the thought sending a chill down my spine. "I think you've been noticed," Maria replied carefully, "by more than one interested party. That makes you valuable or dangerous, depending on who's doing the looking." After we hung up, I took her advice. I changed my patterns, becoming hyper-aware of my surroundings, watching for followers, for suspicious coincidences. I kept driving during the day, strictly following all the rules, even the ones that seemed unnecessary in daylight. A week passed uneventfully. Then 2. By the 3rd week, I had almost convinced myself that things had calmed down, that whatever attention I had attracted had moved on to other targets. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and I had promised to meet my friend Mike for drinks. He'd been texting me for weeks, concerned about my increasing isolation, my vague excuses for canceling plans. I'd finally relented, agreeing to meet him at a bar we both liked in Cambridge. The evening started normally enough. We met at 8, grabbed a booth, ordered beers and burgers. Mike talked about his job at the hospital, about the girl he'd started dating, about his plans to maybe go back to school for another degree. I listened and nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while scanning the bar every few minutes, checking the other patrons for too wide smiles or reflective eyes, watching for anyone who seemed to be paying too much attention to our table. "Dude, what is up with you?" Mike finally asked, setting down his beer with a thud. "You've been weird for weeks. Distant. Paranoid. Are you in some kind of trouble?" I forced a laugh. "Just stressed. Work stuff." Mike wasn't buying it. "Bullshit. I've known you since college. This isn't work stress. This is something else." For a brief, insane moment, I considered telling him everything. About Richard, about the rules, about the entities that looked human but weren't. But I knew how it would sound. Knew it would end with Mike trying to convince me to see a therapist, to get medication for what he would undoubtedly perceive as a psychotic break. It's nothing, I insisted, just haven't been sleeping well. Mike studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Well, whatever it is, you know you can tell me, right? I'm here for you, man. I nodded, guilt washing over me. I know, thanks. We finished our meals in somewhat awkward silence. By the time we left the bar, it was after 11 p.m. The streets were still busy with weekend revelers, but the night had turned cold, a biting wind whipping between the buildings. You want to share an Uber? Mike asked as we stood outside the bar. I shook my head quickly. No, I'll walk. Could use the fresh air. Mike frowned. It's like 20 blocks to your place, and it's freezing. I'll be fine, I insisted. Really? You go ahead. Reluctantly, Mike called his ride and waited with me until it arrived. As he climbed in, he gave me one last concerned look. Call me tomorrow, okay? We should talk more. I nodded, waving as the car pulled away. Then I started walking, pulling my jacket tighter against the cold. The truth was, I couldn't bring myself to get into another driver's car anymore. Not as a passenger, not when I knew what could be waiting in the darkness of a stranger's vehicle. I was about halfway home when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, purposeful steps that seemed to be matching my pace. I turned around, but the sidewalk behind me was empty. Just shadows and the occasional parked car. Uneasy, I walked faster. The footsteps resumed, closer now. Again I turned, and again saw nothing. I was passing a small park, the trees creating deep pools of shadow beyond the reach of the streetlights. As I hurried past, I heard movement among the trees. A rustling, followed by what sounded like a whispered word. My name. I broke into a run, no longer caring how paranoid I might appear to anyone watching. Something was following me. Something that knew my name. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I leaned against a building, scanning the street behind me. Still empty, no sign of pursuit. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the stress and fear of the past weeks had finally pushed me over the edge into actual paranoia. I was about to start walking again when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from another unknown number. Look up. Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I raised my eyes to the roofline of the building across the street. A figure stood at the edge, silhouetted against the night sky. Too far away to make out features, but I could tell it was watching me. And even from this distance, I could see that its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, head too large or small. I couldn't tell which. My phone buzzed again. We see you, Daniel. We always see you. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, not looking back, not stopping at crosswalks, just running blind with panic through the darkened streets of Cambridge. I don't know how long I ran, or exactly what route I took. I only know that when I finally stopped, gasping and dizzy, I was in a part of the city I didn't recognize. Warehouses and industrial buildings lined the street, most dark and shuttered for the night. No pedestrians, no open businesses. Just me and the distant hum of traffic from a highway overpass somewhere nearby. I leaned against a wall, trying to catch my breath, trying to think. My phone had gone silent. No more texts from the unknown number. But that was small comfort now. They knew who I was. They knew my number. They could find me. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a sound nearby. A low mechanical hum, punctuated by the occasional metallic clank. It was coming from one of the warehouses across the street. The only building on the block showing any signs of life, a faint light visible through its grimy windows. I approached cautiously, driven by a combination of curiosity and the need to find some kind of shelter, someplace less exposed than the open street. The building appeared to be some kind of manufacturing facility, though what it produced, I couldn't guess. The loading dock door was down, but a smaller side door stood ajar, light spilling out onto the pavement. I hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct told me not to enter an unknown building in an industrial area in the middle of the night. But the alternative was to remain on the street, exposed and vulnerable to whatever had been following me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior was cavernous, filled with machinery whose purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. Conveyor belts, hydraulic presses, robotic arms frozen in mid-action. The equipment was running, lights blinking on control panels, motors humming, but there were no workers visible. The place seemed to be operating autonomously. I moved deeper into the facility, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The air smelled of oil and metal and something else, something chemical and sharp. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it as my voice bounced off the walls. No response, just the continued mechanical hum and clank of the equipment. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd about the far wall of the warehouse. Unlike the other walls, which were lined with shelving and equipment, this one was bare except for a single door. A red door standing out starkly against the gray concrete. Something about that door called to me. It was so out of place, so deliberate in its positioning and color. Before I could think better of it, I was walking toward it, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see what lay beyond. As I got closer, I noticed strange markings on the door. Symbols etched into the red paint that resembled nothing I recognized. Not letters or numbers from any language I knew, but complex, angular patterns that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, my finger hovering just above the surface of the door. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I whirled around, heart leaping into my throat. A man stood a few yards away, tall, lean, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. He wore work clothes. Jeans, heavy boots, a flannel shirt under a canvas jacket. Nothing threatening about his appearance, but something in his eyes. A wariness, a knowledge, made me instantly on guard. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away from both the man and the door. "Name's Ray," he said, not moving any closer. "I'm the night supervisor here. The real question is, who are you, and what are you doing in my facility?" I fumbled for an explanation. I got lost. The door was open, I thought. I thought someone might have a phone I could use. Ray's expression didn't change. "In an automated factory? At midnight? Try again." I swallowed hard. Something was following me. I needed somewhere to hide. That got a reaction. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tensing of the shoulders. "Following you? What kind of something?" The way he asked it, specific, serious, made me wonder. Did he know? Was he one of the aware ones? "I'm not sure," I said carefully. It was dark, but it knew my name. Ray was quiet for a long moment, studying me intently. Then he reached down and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing his wrist. No circle with lines, no scar like Maria's. Instead, there was a tattoo of a key, identical to the symbol on Maria's business card. "You're a driver," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. "How did you know?" "The look," Ray said simply. "That hunted look. Plus, they don't follow regular folks. Only the aware ones. Only the drivers." I glanced back at the red door. "What is this place? What's behind that door?" Ray's expression darkened. "Nothing you want to see. Nothing anyone should see." He gestured toward the way I'd come in. "Let's talk somewhere else." "This isn't a good place to linger." He led me to a small office near the entrance of the warehouse. Inside was a desk cluttered with paperwork, a few chairs, a coffee maker, and a mini-fridge. Normal, mundane office furnishings that felt surreally out of place after what I'd just experienced. Ray closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "Coffee? You look like you could use it." I nodded, sinking into a chair. "Thanks." As Ray busied himself with the coffee maker, I tried to process what was happening. Another key holder. Here, in this strange automated factory with its mysterious red door. It couldn't be coincidence. "So," Ray said, handing me a mug of black coffee, "who gave you the list? Richard? One of the others?" "Richard," I confirmed, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter, but the warmth was comforting. "About a month ago. But I've met others since. Maria, a doctor, and someone claiming to be from the Watchers." Ray's expression hardened at the mention of the Watchers. "Stay away from them," he said flatly. "They're bad news." "So I've been told," I replied. "But what I don't understand is why. What are they really doing? What do they want?" Ray sighed heavily, sinking into the chair behind the desk. "The Watchers started with good intentions. A long time ago. Scholars, occultists, people who noticed the pattern of disappearances around thresholds and wanted to understand it. But understanding became obsession. Obsession became something else. Maria said they sacrificed drivers for their research." Ray nodded grimly. "That's part of it. They set up scenarios where the rules have to be broken, then document what happens. But it's worse than that. Some of them have started to worship the entities, see them as gods, as the next stage of evolution. They believe that by helping the entities cross over, they'll be rewarded, spared, elevated." I thought of Lauren, of her insistence that the Watchers were trying to contain the entities, not serve them. Had she been lying, or simply deceived? "And the key holders?" I asked. "What do you want?" "To survive," Ray said simply. "To help others survive. We share information, warnings. We maintain the boundaries where we can." I glanced toward the door of the office, thinking of the red door beyond. Is that what this place is? Some kind of boundary? Ray was quiet for a long moment, seeming to debate how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed. "This building sits on a junction point, a place where the barrier between worlds is naturally thin. The factory was built to contain it, to keep it stable. The machinery generates patterns, rhythms, frequencies that strengthen the barrier." Ray's expression was deadly serious. "The red door isn't a door to another room, Daniel. It's a door to somewhere else. The symbols are locks. The machinery is the key that keeps those locks engaged." I tried to wrap my mind around what he was saying. A door between worlds, hidden in an automated factory in Cambridge. It sounded insane. And yet, after everything I'd seen and experienced in the past month, I couldn't dismiss it. "There are places like this all over," Ray continued. "Junction points, weak spots. Most are natural. Caves, sinkholes, certain bodies of water. But some are man-made. Tunnels, bridges. Places where humans have inadvertently created thresholds that align with the natural weak points. The rules," I said, making connections now. "No tunnels after midnight, no stopping at certain places." Ray nodded. "The rules keep you away from the weak points, from the places where they can reach through more easily. And the things that look human, the passengers, some are entities that have already crossed over. Weak ones mostly. The stronger ones can't maintain a physical form in our world for long. They need a host, a vessel." Ray's eyes met mine, hard and serious. "That's what happens to the drivers who disappear. The ones who are found later, changed. They become vessels, walking thresholds." The thought made my skin crawl. I remembered Richard's words. They feed on fear, on life itself. A driver, alone in a car at night, is an ideal vessel. "Why drivers specifically?" I asked. "Why us?" "Because you're already liminal," Ray explained. "Already operating in the threshold space, moving between places, between states, private and public, alone and in company. Your awareness, your nervousness, your alertness, it all creates a certain frequency, one that resonates with them." I thought of all the nights I'd spent driving, all the strangers I'd welcomed into my car. How many of them had been something other than human? How close had I come to being taken, hollowed out, turned into a vessel? "The thing that followed me tonight," I said, remembering the figure on the rooftop, the text message. "What was it?" "A scout, probably," Ray replied. They use them to track potential vessels, to identify the aware ones. So they know about me now. The realization settled like a weight in my stomach. They're hunting me specifically. Ray didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, once you're on their radar, you stay there. That's why the rules are so important. They're your only protection. I drank the last of my coffee, trying to steady my nerves. So what do I do now? Keep driving? Quit? Run? Running won't help, Ray said, shaking his head. They don't care about geography. Distance means nothing to them. So I'm just trapped? Hunted for the rest of my life? Ray studied me for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small object. He placed it on the desk between us. It was a key. Old brass, intricately designed with the same symbol that was tattooed on his wrist worked into the bow. There is another option, he said quietly. Join us. Formally. Become a true key holder. I stared at the key. What does that mean, exactly? It means protection, strength in numbers, access to knowledge and resources beyond the basic rules. Ray tapped the key with one finger. It also means responsibility, watching the boundaries, maintaining the locks, protecting others who don't even know they need protection. Like guarding that red door, I said, understanding dawning. Ray nodded. This is just one of many. There are key holders all over the world, standing guard at the weak points, making sure what's on the other side stays there. I thought about it. About the past month of fear and paranoia, of constantly looking over my shoulder, of sleeping with the lights on. About the choice between continuing that existence alone or joining something larger, something with purpose. What would I have to do, I asked. First, truly understand what you're getting into, Ray said seriously. This isn't a game. It isn't temporary. Once you're in for life. The entities never forget a key holder. And if I say no, then you walk out of here with what you know. Keep following the rules. Try to stay alive on your own. Ray's expression was sympathetic but firm. I won't lie to you. It's harder alone. But the choice has to be yours, freely made. I looked at the key again, gleaming dully in the harsh fluorescent light of the office. Part of me wanted to refuse, to walk away, to try to reclaim some semblance of my normal life. But I knew that wasn't possible anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I now knew. If I say yes, I began slowly, what happens next? Ray picked up the key and held it out to me. You take this, you meet the others. You learn the true nature of the boundaries, of the locks, of what we're keeping at bay. I hesitated, then reached out and took the key. It was heavier than it looked, and cold to the touch. This doesn't bind you yet, Ray said. The ceremony comes later. For now, it's just a symbol, a marker to other key holders that you're one of us. I slipped the key into my pocket, alongside Richard's list of rules. And the ceremony? What does that involve? Ray's expression turned grim. Blood, pain, sacrifice. Nothing given freely is truly valued. Nothing easily obtained is properly respected. He rolled down his sleeve, covering the key tattoo. But that's for later. If you decide to continue. He stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. For now, I'll get you home safely. The entities won't approach a senior keyholder directly. Too risky for them. As we left the office, I cast one last glance toward the red door at the far end of the warehouse. In the dim light, the symbols etched into its surface seemed to pulse faintly, like something breathing. What exactly is on the other side? I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. Ray followed my gaze, his expression unreadable. Something old? He said quietly. Something hungry. Something that remembers what the world was like before humans, and wants it to be that way again. He turned away from the door, gesturing for me to follow. Come on, dawn's not far off. They're stronger in the deepest dark, just before the sun rises. We should be gone by then. As we walked toward the exit, a thought occurred to me. The factory, I said. You said it helps maintain the boundary. What happens if it stops running? If the machinery breaks down? Ray paused, his hand on the door. Then the locks start to fail, he said simply. The door starts to open, and what's on the other side begins to come through. Has that ever happened? 3 times in recorded history. Ray pushed open the door, letting in the cold night air. We don't talk about those times. We just make sure they don't happen again. We stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The street was still deserted, the city mostly asleep. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid of the shadows. I had the key in my pocket, the rules in my head, and a key holder at my side. I wasn't alone anymore. I was part of something larger, something with purpose. Whether that purpose would save me or damn me, I didn't yet know. But at least now, I had a fighting chance. Part 8. Ray drove me home in a battered pickup truck that smelled of oil and cigarettes. We didn't talk much during the ride. I was lost in thought, processing everything I'd learned, everything I'd agreed to. The key sat heavy in my pocket, a physical reminder of the path I was now on. "Get some rest," Ray said as he pulled up to my building. "Someone will contact you within 3 days about the ceremony." I nodded, climbing out of the truck. "Thanks for everything." Ray's expression remained serious. "Don't thank me yet. You don't know what you're in for." With that ominous parting, he drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk in the gray light of early morning. Inside my apartment, I collapsed onto my bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. But despite my fatigue, sleep wouldn't come. I kept seeing the red door, the symbols that seemed to shift and breathe, the figure on the rooftop with its wrong proportions. I pulled the key from my pocket and studied it more closely. It was old, that much was clear. The brass worn smooth in places from handling, the teeth shaped in a pattern I didn't recognize. The symbol worked into the bow was the same stylized key I'd seen on Ray's wrist, on Maria's business card. What had I gotten myself into? A secret society of drivers fighting interdimensional entities? Guarding doors to other worlds? It sounded like the plot of a bad sci-fi movie, not something that could be happening in reality, in my life. And yet, I'd seen things I couldn't explain. The darkness in my car when Alex changed, Emily's too wide smile and knowing words, the figure on the rooftop, impossibly proportioned, the red door and its breathing symbols. Either this was all real, or I was having an elaborate psychotic break. And at this point, I almost hoped for the latter. I must have finally drifted off, because the next thing I knew, my phone was ringing. It was past noon, the sun streaming through my blinds. The caller ID showed Maria's number. "Hello?" I answered groggily. "Daniel?" Maria's voice was tense. "Are you okay? I heard about last night." I sat up, suddenly alert. "You heard? From who?" "Ray called me. Said you'd been followed, that you found the Cambridge Junction point." She paused. "He also said he gave you a key." I glanced at the brass key on my nightstand. "Yes, he did. Have you decided about the ceremony?" "I think so," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. "Yes, I'm in." Maria let out a breath. "Okay, good. That's good." She hesitated. "It won't be easy, Daniel. The ceremony is intense, painful, but necessary." "So I've been told," I replied. "When will it happen?" "Tomorrow night. The new moon. It's traditional." Maria's voice softened slightly. "I'll be there to help you through it." After we hung up, I spent the day in a strange state of calm resignation. I cleaned my apartment, did laundry, paid bills. Normal, mundane tasks that felt surreal given what I now knew, what I was preparing to do. That evening, I received a text from another unknown number. "Midnight tomorrow. The old Brighton Mill. Bring the key. Come alone. Signature, K." The Brighton Mill was an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of the city, a relic of Boston's industrial past. It had been shut down for decades, the property tied up in legal disputes that had prevented its demolition or redevelopment. I'd driven past it many times, but never had reason to go inside. Until now. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. I didn't work, couldn't focus enough to read or watch TV. I just waited, counting down the hours until midnight. until whatever ceremony awaited me at the mill. As the appointed time approached, I showered and dressed in clean but comfortable clothes, not knowing what to expect. I slipped the key into my pocket, alongside Richard's list of rules. My talisman, my protection for the past month. I took an Uber to within a few blocks of the mill, then walked the rest of the way. The night was clear and cold, stars visible above the light pollution of the city. The mill loomed against the sky, a hulking shadow of brick and broken windows. The main entrance was chained and padlocked, with faded "no trespassing" signs posted every few feet. But as I approached, I noticed a smaller side door standing slightly ajar, a faint light visible within. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was cavernous, much like Ray's factory, but long abandoned. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the debris-strewn floor. Rusted machinery sat silent, ghostly shapes in the darkness. At the center of the main floor, a circle of light glowed. As my eyes adjusted, I made out figures standing around what appeared to be a ring of candles. 7 people, their faces shadowed, waiting. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. As I drew closer, the figures turned toward me. I recognized Ray and Maria. The others were strangers. 3 men and 2 women of varying ages, all watching me with the same serious, assessing gaze. "Daniel," Ray said, stepping forward. "You came." I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump of fear in my throat. "Do you have the key?" asked one of the strangers, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. I reached into my pocket and produced the brass key Ray had given me. It caught the candlelight, gleaming warmly against my palm. "And have you come of your own free will?" the woman continued. "Without coercion or deception?" "I have," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I expected. The woman nodded, satisfied. "Then we may begin." She gestured for me to enter the circle of candles. Inside, I could now see that symbols had been drawn on the concrete floor, the same angular, shifting patterns I'd seen on the red door. In the center of the circle stood a small stone pedestal, like a bird bath without the basin. Atop it sat a large, ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be dark leather, and beside it, a curved knife with an ivory handle. My stomach clenched at the sight of the knife. Blood, pain, sacrifice. Ray's words echoed in my mind. "Before we proceed," the silver-haired woman said, "you must understand what you're agreeing to. The life of a keyholder is not easy. It is not safe. It is not normal. Once you join us, there is no leaving. The knowledge you gain, the power you access, these come with permanent responsibility." I swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you?" Her eyes were hard, searching. "Once the entities know you as a keyholder, they will never stop hunting you. Never stop testing the boundaries. You will spend the rest of your life in vigilance, in service to the locks." "I understand," I repeated more firmly this time. The woman studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Let us begin." The keyholders moved to form a tight circle around me, each taking a position that seemed predetermined. Ray stood directly across from me, Maria to my right. The silver-haired woman positioned herself between the pedestal and me. "I am Catherine," she said, "First Key of the Eastern Seaboard, Guardian of the Boston Locks. Tonight, I will guide you through the binding." Catherine opened the book on the pedestal, revealing pages covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen on the red door. She began to read aloud in a language I didn't recognize. The syllables harsh and fluid by turns, unnaturally resonant in the empty factory. As she spoke, the other keyholders joined in, creating a rhythmic chant that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. I felt a pressure building in my ears, a sensation of weight and watchfulness. Catherine picked up the knife. "Your hand," she said, breaking from the chant momentarily. I hesitated, then extended my left hand. Catherine took it in a grip that was surprisingly strong for her age. With one swift motion, she drew the knife across my palm. Pain lanced through my hand as blood welled up, dripping onto the symbols drawn on the floor. I gasped, but didn't pull away. Catherine placed the key in my bleeding palm, pressing my fingers closed around it. "Blood to blood," she intoned. "Flesh to metal, will to purpose. The key accepts your sacrifice. The lock acknowledges your guardianship." The key in my hand began to grow warm, then hot, until it felt like it was burning into my flesh. I would have dropped it, but Catherine held my hand firmly closed. "Through pain comes clarity," she continued. "Through sacrifice, power. Through vigilance, safety. Do you accept the burden of the key?" The pain was intense now, radiating up my arm. Through clenched teeth, I managed to say, "I accept." "Then be bound to the locks," Catherine declared. "Be marked as their guardian. Be known to those who stand watch and those who seek entry." She released my hand, and I opened my fingers. The key was gone, seemingly absorbed into my flesh. In its place, burned into my palm, was the symbol of the key, raw and red like a brand. "The physical key is but a token," Catherine explained, seeing my confusion. "The true key is knowledge, purpose, will. These you now carry within you, marked upon your flesh." The chanting of the other key holders had continued throughout, growing in intensity. Now it reached a crescendo, the strange syllables echoing off the factory walls. The candles flared suddenly brighter, as if caught in a gust of wind where none existed. And then, at the edge of my hearing, another sound joined the chant. A distant, muffled pounding, like something beating against a door, something wanting to get in. The key holders' voices rose in response, their chant becoming more urgent, more forceful. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones, in the newly branded symbol on my palm. "They sense the ceremony," Ray said, his voice tight. "They always do. The binding creates a disturbance, a ripple they can follow." "Stay in the circle," Maria urged, moving closer to me. "No matter what you hear, what you see, stay in the circle." The pounding was all around us now, reverberating through the factory. The shadows beyond the circle of candlelight seemed to deepen, to move with purpose. I caught glimpses of shapes in the darkness, elongated figures, wrong proportions, too wide smiles. The key holders formed a tighter circle around me, their chanting never faltering. Catherine held the book open before her, reading faster now, her voice rising above the others. "The final step," she said, looking up from the book to meet my eyes. "The acknowledgement. Speak your name, your full name, and your acceptance of the key." I hesitated, the pounding so loud now it was difficult to think. The shapes in the darkness were pressing closer, becoming more defined. I could see eyes now. Reflective, animal-like eyes, watching from the shadows. "Speak," Catherine commanded, "or the binding fails and we all pay the price." Drawing a deep breath, I raised my voice above the pounding, above the chant. "I, Daniel James Holloway, accept the key and the burden it carries. I will guard the locks. I will maintain the boundaries. I will stand watch against what lies beyond." The moment the words left my mouth, a shockwave seemed to emanate from the circle, rippling outward through the factory. The pounding stopped abruptly. The shapes in the darkness recoiled, dissolving back into ordinary shadows. The branded symbol on my palm flared with pain once more, then subsided to a dull throb. When I looked at it again, the raw redness had faded to a silvery scar in the perfect shape of the key. The key holder's chant gradually quieted, then ceased entirely. For a moment, the factory was utterly silent. No pounding, no whispers, not even the sound of wind outside. Then Catherine closed the book with a decisive thud. "It is done," she said simply. "You are bound to the key. The key is bound to you. Welcome, key holder." One by one, the others approached me, each taking my left hand in theirs, pressing their key-marked palms against mine, in a gesture that was both greeting and confirmation. I felt a strange resonance with each touch, a sense of connection that went beyond the physical. Ray was the last to approach. "The hard part's just beginning," he said quietly as our marked palms met. But you're not alone anymore. Remember that. After the ceremony, as the key holders extinguished the candles and packed away the book and knife, Maria pulled me aside. "How do you feel?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "Different," I said, realizing it was true. There was a clarity to my thoughts, a heightened awareness of my surroundings that hadn't been there before. More awake, somehow. Maria nodded. "The binding does that. Sharpens the senses, strengthens the barriers of your own being, even as it connects you to the greater locks." She touched her own palm absently. "It takes some getting used to." "What happens now?" I asked, watching as the others prepared to leave. "Now you learn," Maria replied. "The true history of the key holders, the nature of the locks, your specific duties." She smiled slightly. "And you keep driving. That doesn't change, even with the entities hunting me?" "Especially because of that," Catherine interjected, having overheard our conversation. "The entities are drawn to drivers, to thresholds, in motion. As a key holder, you now serve as bait, in a sense, but also as a trap." "A trap?" I repeated, confused. Catherine's expression was grim. "Every entity that focuses on you is one that's not targeting someone unaware, someone defenseless. And now that you're bound to the key, you have resources that ordinary drivers don't." I glanced down at the silvery scar on my palm. "The mark?" "The mark is just a symbol," Catherine said. "The power is in the knowledge, in the community, in the techniques you'll learn." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "You'll understand more in the coming days. For now, rest, heal. The binding takes a toll on the body and mind." As the key holders dispersed, slipping away into the night in ones and twos, Ray approached me one last time. "I'll drive you home," he offered. "Not safe to be alone tonight. The binding leaves an echo, a trace they can follow." I nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline of the ceremony was wearing off, leaving me drained and aching, the brand on my palm throbbing in time with my heartbeat. In Ray's truck, as we drove through the dark streets back toward my apartment, I finally asked the question that had been nagging at me since I first received the key. "Richard," I said, "what happened to him? Lauren said he was gone, that the bookstore was compromised." Ray's expression darkened. Richard was one of us, a key holder, had been for nearly 40 years. He sighed heavily. "Until about a month ago." "What happened?" I pressed. "He broke a rule," Ray said simply. "The most important rule of all. Never open a lock you're sworn to guard." My blood ran cold. "He opened a door? Like the red one?" Ray nodded grimly. "Not exactly like that one, but similar. A junction point he'd been guarding for decades. No one knows why he did it. Curiosity, maybe. Or something got to him, got inside his head. And what happened to him? What always happens when a door is opened that should stay closed?" Ray's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Something came through. Something that wore his face afterward." I thought of my meeting with Richard in the bookstore, his pale eyes, his precise manner of speaking. Had I been talking to Richard at all? Or to something wearing his skin, using his memories? "If that's true," I said slowly, "then the list he gave me is still valid," Ray assured me. "The rules work, regardless of who's sharing them. That's the trap, you see. The entities have to acknowledge certain boundaries, certain limitations. They're bound by rules as much as we are. Different rules, but rules nonetheless. So, whatever was pretending to be Richard still gave me genuine protection? More likely it was playing a longer game," Ray replied. "Setting you up for something. The Watchers, maybe. Or trying to identify other potential key holders." I slumped back in my seat, trying to process this new revelation. Nothing was as it seemed. No one was who they appeared to be. The world I thought I knew was just a thin veneer over something darker, stranger, more dangerous. "Don't overthink it," Ray advised, seeing my expression. "That's the quickest way to madness in this line of work. Focus on what you know for certain. Follow the rules. Guard the locks. Trust your fellow key holders." He paused. Mostly, anyway. As we pulled up to my building, Ray reached into his pocket and handed me a small object. A medallion of some sort, made of tarnished silver with the key symbol etched into one side. "Keep this with you," he said, "especially while driving. It won't stop them entirely, but it'll make you harder to track, harder to influence." I took the medallion, feeling its weight. "Thank you," Ray nodded. "Get some rest. Someone will contact you tomorrow with your first assignment." Assignment? We all have specific duties, areas to monitor, locks to check, information to gather. Ray's expression was serious. The binding isn't just a ceremony, Daniel. It's an induction into a war. A very old, very quiet war that most people don't even know is being fought around them every day. As I climbed out of the truck, medallion in hand, brand throbbing on my palm, I realized the full weight of what I'd committed to. Not just protection from the entities, not just answers to the mysteries I'd stumbled into, but a lifetime of service, of vigilance, of standing guard at the boundaries of reality itself. I had become a key holder, and there was no going back. Part 9. The call came at dawn, pulling me from a fitful sleep filled with dreams of red doors and shifting shadows. An unknown number, as I'd come to expect. "Hello?" I answered groggily, the events of the previous night still hazy in my mind. "Daniel," Catherine's voice, crisp and authoritative. "How's the mark?" I glanced at my palm. The silvery scar was still there, still in the shape of a key, but the redness and swelling around it had subsided. "Better. Doesn't hurt as much." "Good. The initial bonding is complete then." She paused. "Are you ready for your first assignment?" I sat up, suddenly more alert. "Already?" I thought there would be training or something first. "The best training is experience," Catherine replied. "And we have a situation that needs attention, something that requires a driver." 20 minutes later, I was dressed and in my car, following Catherine's instructions to drive to a coffee shop in Back Bay. The morning was gray and drizzly, the streets just beginning to fill with commuters. I kept glancing at the key mark on my palm, still not quite believing everything that had happened. The coffee shop was a small, independent place tucked between a boutique and a bookstore. Through the window, I could see Catherine seated at a table in the back, a manila folder and 2 coffee cups in front of her. "You look terrible," she said as I slid into the chair across from her. It wasn't unkind, merely factual. "Rough night," I replied, taking the coffee she pushed toward me. "Strange dreams." Catherine nodded. "That's normal after the binding. Your mind is adjusting, opening to awareness that wasn't accessible before." I took a sip of the coffee. Black, strong, exactly what I needed. "So, what's this assignment?" Catherine opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a nondescript office building, maybe 10 stories tall. Glass and steel like countless others across the city. "The Archer Building," she said. "Financial district. Houses various businesses, law firms, investment companies, consultants. Seemingly ordinary. But not actually ordinary, I guessed." "No." Catherine turned the photo over. On the back was a blueprint of the building, with one area circled in red. The basement level, specifically a maintenance room in the northeast corner. There's a junction point there, like the red door in Race Factory. Similar, though not as active, more of a potential threshold. Under normal circumstances, it's barely noticeable. A slight thinning of the barrier, nothing more. Catherine's expression turned serious. But in the past week, something's changed. The thinning has accelerated. The junction point is becoming unstable. "What would cause that?" I asked. "That's what we need to find out." Catherine produced another photo, this one of a man in his 50s, balding, wearing an expensive suit. Martin Graves, CEO of Archer Financial, the primary tenant of the building. Recently, he's been spending unusual amounts of time in the building after hours. Security logs show him accessing the basement level repeatedly over the past month. I studied the photo. Nothing obviously sinister about the man, just an ordinary executive type. "You think he knows about the junction point?" "We think someone's told him about it," Catherine said grimly. "The Watchers have been unusually active lately. We believe they may have approached Graves, recruited him somehow. To do what? Open the junction point? Catherine nodded. Or prepare it for opening. Junction points aren't like the red door. They can't simply be unlocked. They have to be cultivated, developed. Certain conditions have to be created. I remembered something from the codex Lauren had given me. They feed on human fear and life energy. They need sacrifices, I said quietly. Victims. Energy transfers, Catherine corrected, though her expression suggested the distinction was merely semantic. And yes, that's our concern. That Graves is helping to prepare the junction point, making it more receptive to full manifestation. So, what do you need me to do? Break into the building? Catherine shook her head. Nothing so dramatic. We need eyes inside. Confirmation of our suspicions before we take more direct action. She slid a business card across the table. Archer Financial is looking for drivers. Private car service for executives and clients. You have an interview this afternoon. I picked up the card, turning it over in my fingers. You want me to spy on them? We want you to observe. Report. That's all. Catherine's eyes were hard. For now. And if I confirm they're doing something with the junction point? Then we intervene, Catherine said simply. How we intervene depends on what you discover. I slipped the card into my pocket. I'm assuming there are specific things I should look for? Beyond just Graves accessing the basement? Catherine nodded, producing a small notebook from her purse. Here, this contains the signs of junction point activation. Subtle things. Temperature fluctuations, electronic malfunctions, unusual patterns of shadow and light. Also, physical symptoms people might experience near an active junction point. I took the notebook, flipping through the pages of neat, precise handwriting. This looks like Richard's writing, I observed. It is, Catherine confirmed. Before his compromise, he was our primary researcher on junction point manifestations. His observations remain valid, even if he himself was lost. I tucked the notebook into my jacket. Anything else I should know? Yes. Catherine leaned forward, her voice dropping. The Archer building is surrounded by 3 churches, a synagogue, and a Buddhist temple. All old, all built on their sites for specific historical reasons. This creates a geographical pattern that normally helps contain the junction point. Like the machinery in Ray's factory? Precisely. Different method, same principle. The religious buildings create a resonance that strengthens the barrier. Catherine's expression was grim. But if someone is deliberately working to disrupt that resonance, to create counter vibrations, the entire downtown could be at risk. At risk of what exactly? I asked, though I was beginning to fear I knew the answer. At risk of becoming a major incursion point. Catherine said simply, a door that can't be closed again. The interview at Archer Financial was straightforward enough. The company maintained a small fleet of luxury cars for executive transport, and they needed drivers with clean records and professional demeanor. My Uber experience was a plus, they said. The pay was significantly better than rideshare driving, and the hours more regular. Primarily weekdays, with occasional evenings for special events. I was interviewed by the head of security, a former police officer named Donovan who seemed more interested in my driving record than my personality. He showed me the garage where the company cars were kept, sleek black sedans with tinted windows, and explained the booking system, the dress code, the expectations. Nothing seemed overtly suspicious, just a typical corporate car service for a financial firm with clients to impress. Any questions? Donovan asked as we completed the tour. What about building access? I asked casually. Will I need a key card or something to get to the garage? You'll get a level 1 access card, Donovan explained. It gets you into the garage and the main lobby, nowhere else. He gave me a pointed look. The executive floors and utility areas are restricted access. No reason for drivers to be there. Of course, I agreed. I was just wondering about restrooms, break areas, that sort of thing. Donovan nodded. Driver's lounge is on the garage level. Has everything you need. Restrooms, kitchenette, TV. No need to go wandering. His emphasis on the last point was subtle but clear. Drivers were to stay in their designated areas. No exceptions. The interview ended with a job offer, contingent on a background check. I'd start Monday, working the day shift, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., primarily doing airport runs and shuttling executives to meetings around the city. As I left the building, I found myself studying it more carefully. From the outside, it was entirely unremarkable. Just another office tower in the financial district. Nothing to suggest it housed a weakening point in the fabric of reality. Nothing to indicate that its basement might contain a gateway to another dimension. What had I expected? Ominous clouds circling the rooftop? Strange lights in the windows? Reality was more subtle than that, I was learning. The truly dangerous things hid in plain sight, wrapped in the mundane, the ordinary, the expected. I called Catherine from a coffee shop 2 blocks away, giving her the basics of the interview and job offer. "Perfect," she said. "This gives you legitimate access to the building. Your priority is to get a reading on the junction point. Confirm whether it's becoming more active, and, if so, how quickly it's progressing. And how exactly am I supposed to access the basement if I'm restricted to the garage and lobby?" I asked. "We'll work on that," Catherine replied. "For now, just establish yourself. Learn the routines, the security patterns. Observe Graves if you can, his behavior, his associates." After hanging up, I sat in the coffee shop for a while, watching people pass by on the sidewalk outside. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of junction points and entities and the thin barriers separating their reality from something much darker. I glanced down at the key mark on my palm. Now just a silvery scar that could be mistaken for an unusual birthmark or old injury. I was part of something ancient now, something secret. A guardian at the gates, watching for threats that most people couldn't even conceive of. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. I'd been thrust into this world less than 2 months ago, given a list of rules by a man who might not have been a man at all, and now I was a key holder, engaged in surveillance of a potential dimensional breach. It was absurd, insane, and yet I couldn't deny what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The entities were real. The danger was real. And if Catherine was right, the threat building in the Archer building was very real indeed. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine arranged for me to meet with another key holder named Eliza, who provided me with a modified smartphone, one that could detect certain energy signatures associated with junction points. She showed me how to use it, disguising the scanning process as normal phone usage. "It's not perfect," Eliza explained. "The readings can be affected by other energy sources, electrical systems, certain geological formations, but it should give you a baseline at least." Sunday night, I received a text from an unknown number, a pattern I was becoming accustomed to within the keyholder network. "Watch for the signs. Trust your instincts. The mark will guide you. Signature R." Ray, I assumed. Cryptic but reassuring in its way. A reminder that despite the strangeness of my new reality, I wasn't facing it alone. Monday morning arrived foggy and cool. I dressed in the required uniform for Archer Financial drivers, black suit, white shirt, black tie, and headed downtown for my first day. The key mark on my palm tingled slightly as I approached the building, a sensation I hadn't experienced before. The day shift was busy but straightforward. I made 4 airport runs, shuttled executives to lunch meetings, waited in the car during their appointments. Standard chauffeur duties. Between runs, I spent time in the driver's lounge, chatting with the other drivers, 6 in total, all seemingly ordinary people with no knowledge of junction points or entities. I kept the modified phone with me, checking it periodically, but detected nothing unusual. No opportunity presented itself to access the basement or observe Graves directly. It wasn't until my 3rd day that a breakthrough came. I was assigned to drive Graves himself to a dinner meeting across town. As he settled into the back seat of the sedan, I studied him in the rearview mirror. In person, he seemed more haggard than his photograph. Dark circles under his eyes, skin slightly sallow, movements a bit too careful, as if he were in pain. "New driver?" he asked, noticing my glance. Yes, sir, I replied politely. Started Monday. Graves nodded absently, his attention already turning to his phone. I drove in silence, focusing on the road while keeping one eye on my passenger in the mirror. About halfway to our destination, Graves suddenly winced, his hand going to his temple. The motion caused his sleeve to ride up slightly, revealing what looked like a bandage on his inner wrist. "Are you all right, sir?" I asked, feigning concern. "Fine," Graves said tersely. "Just a headache. Been getting them a lot lately." I remembered something from Catherine's notebook. Headaches were one of the physical symptoms experienced by people exposed to active junction points. "There's water in the console if you need it," I offered. Graves grunted in acknowledgement but didn't reach for the water. Instead, he pulled his sleeve down firmly, covering the bandage. I caught a glimpse of something dark at its edge. Not blood, but what looked like ink. A tattoo, perhaps? The dinner meeting lasted 2 hours. I waited in the car, using the time to review Catherine's notebook and text her about the possible tattoo on Graves' wrist. Her response was immediate. "Circle with 3 lines?" I texted back. Couldn't see clearly. Covered by bandage. Recently done, it seemed. Catherine's reply was terse. "Get confirmation if possible. High priority." When Graves emerged from the restaurant, he was with another man. Tall, thin, with silver gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. They spoke briefly at the entrance. Then the other man clasped Graves' shoulder in what seemed like a reassuring gesture before walking away. As Graves approached the car, I noticed his gait was unsteady. Not drunk, something else. A weakness in his limbs, a hesitation in his movements. "Back to the office," he said as he climbed into the back seat. His voice was strained. I nodded, pulling away from the curb. "Yes, sir." In the rearview mirror, I could see Graves massaging his left wrist, the one with the bandage. His expression was pained, his breathing slightly labored. "Are you sure you're all right, sir?" I asked again. "I could take you to a hospital instead." "No," Graves said sharply. "No hospitals. The office. There's medication there." As we drove, I subtly activated the scanner on the modified phone, keeping it low in the center console where Graves couldn't see it. The readings were faint but definitely present. Energy patterns that Eliza had identified as consistent with junction point bleed-through. They were coming from Graves himself. When we reached the Archer building, Graves practically stumbled out of the car. "Park and wait," he ordered. "I'll need you again in an hour." I watched as he made his way to the private elevator, his movements increasingly uncoordinated. Once he was inside, I quickly texted Catherine. Energy readings from Graves himself. He's deteriorating physically. Heading to get medication in the building. Orders me to wait. Her response came seconds later. "Follow if possible. Use the mark." Use the mark? I stared at the silvery key scar on my palm, uncertain what Catherine meant. How was I supposed to use it? I parked the car in the garage and headed to the driver's lounge, making a show of getting coffee, chatting briefly with another driver who was ending his shift. All the while, my mind raced. Graves was clearly affected by something related to the junction point. The man at the restaurant. Could he have been a watcher? The bandaged wrist suggested the tattoo Richard and Maria had warned me about. After 15 minutes, I made my move. Instead of returning to the car, I headed for the main elevator bank. My access card wouldn't get me to the executive floors, but I could at least reach the lobby, see if there was any way to observe Graves' movements from there. As I approached the elevators, my key mark began to tingle more intensely, almost burning. Acting on instinct, I pressed my marked palm flat against the security card reader. To my shock, the panel lit up green. Access granted. Inside the elevator, I found I could select any floor, including B basement. The mark was somehow overriding the security system. Heart pounding, I pressed B. As the elevator descended, I took out the modified phone, watching as the energy reading spiked dramatically. Whatever was happening in the basement, it was powerful. The elevator doors opened onto a utilitarian corridor. Concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, pipes running along the ceiling. Signs pointed to various maintenance areas. Electrical, HVAC, water systems. Following the strongest readings on the phone, I made my way toward the northeast corner of the building. The air grew noticeably colder as I approached, my breath becoming visible in small clouds. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, some going out entirely as I passed beneath them. All signs from Catherine's notebook, all indicators of an active junction point. I turned a final corner and stopped abruptly. Ahead was a door marked "Mechanical. Authorized personnel only." It was ajar, a strange, pulsing light spilling out from within. Not electrical, not flame, but something that seemed to shift between colors that didn't quite have names. Voices emerged from the room. One I recognized as Graves, the other unfamiliar, speaking in a language that made no sense to my ears, yet somehow resonated painfully in my skull. Moving as quietly as possible, I edged closer to the door, peering through the narrow opening. The room beyond had been transformed. What had likely once been an ordinary mechanical room was now a ritualistic space. Symbols had been painted on the walls and floor, some similar to those I'd seen on the red door and during my binding ceremony, others completely foreign and unsettling to look at directly. In the center of the room stood Graves, his suit jacket and shirt removed, revealing a torso covered in fresh tattoos. The same symbols, inscribed directly onto his flesh. His eyes were closed, his arms outstretched, his expression a mixture of pain and ecstasy. Beside him stood the silver-haired man from the restaurant, but he appeared different now, taller somehow, his proportions subtly wrong, his smile just slightly too wide for his face. In his hand, he held what looked like a bone needle, which he was using to add more tattoos to Graves' already covered skin. With each new symbol completed, the pulsing light in the room intensified. It seemed to be emanating from a section of wall behind Graves, a section that appeared to be thinning somehow, becoming translucent. I could see movement beyond it, shapes that didn't correspond to any normal physical structure. The junction point was opening, and Graves was being transformed into the key. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I needed to report this to Catherine immediately. This was worse than we'd thought. Not just preparation for an opening, but the opening itself, already in progress. As I turned to retreat, my phone slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, clattering loudly on the concrete floor. The voices in the room went silent. "We have a visitor," said the silver-haired man, his voice now perfectly understandable and chillingly calm. "How fortunate. Another vessel is always useful." I ran, sprinting back the way I'd come, toward the elevator, toward escape. Behind me, I heard the mechanical room door slam open, followed by footsteps. Too many footsteps for just two people, moving at a pace that seemed impossibly quick. I reached the elevator and jabbed the call button repeatedly. My key mark was burning now, painfully hot against my palm. The elevator was taking too long. The footsteps were getting closer. Making a split-second decision, I veered toward the stairwell instead. As I pushed through the door, I caught a glimpse of what was pursuing me. The silver-haired man, now moving with a strange, fluid gait that didn't seem entirely human, and behind him, three more figures, shadowy and indistinct, but undeniably there. I took the stairs two at a time, racing upward toward the lobby, toward safety, toward witnesses. My phone was gone, but I still had my regular cell. As I ran, I fumbled it from my pocket, dialing Catherine's number. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel, what's happening?" "Junction point active," I gasped, still climbing. "Graves is being converted. Some kind of living key. Entity, present, disguised as human. Silver hair, wire glasses. They saw me. They're chasing me." "Where are you now?" Catherine's voice was urgent but controlled. "Stairwell, heading for lobby. Need backup." "Listen carefully," Catherine said. "Do not go to the lobby. Repeat, do not go to the lobby. Exit at the garage level. Ray is already there with others." I changed direction, turning at the next landing to head down toward the garage. Below me, I could hear the pursuit. That too-fast movement, the sound of something that wasn't quite footsteps on the stairs. They're below me too, I reported, panic rising in my throat. I'm caught between. The mark, Catherine said firmly. Press it against any metal surface and repeat. The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands. Do it now, Daniel. I reached the landing between floors, pressed my marked palm against the metal railing, and spoke the words Catherine had given me. The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then my palm flared with white-hot pain, and the stairwell filled with a high-pitched keening sound, like metal scraping against metal, amplified 100-fold. From above and below came shrieks of pain, inhuman sounds of rage and frustration. The pursuit stopped. Now run, Catherine ordered through the phone. The effect is temporary. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran down the remaining flights to the garage level, bursting through the door into the concrete expanse of parked cars. Across the way, I saw Ray's pickup truck, with Ray himself standing beside it, along with Maria and 2 other key holders I recognized from my binding ceremony. As I sprinted toward them, the stairwell door behind me exploded outward, torn from its hinges by something impossibly strong. The silver-haired man emerged, except he no longer looked remotely human. His body had elongated limbs stretching to unnatural proportions, his face split by that too wide smile that now literally stretched from ear to ear, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth. "The truck!" Ray shouted, already moving to the driver's side. "Now!" I reached the pickup just as the entity let out a shriek that hurt my ears, my mind. Maria pulled me into the back seat, the other key holders cramming in beside me. Ray gunned the engine, tires squealing as we shot toward the garage exit. In the side mirror, I could see the entity pursuing us, moving with that unnatural speed, joined now by the shadowy figures I'd glimpsed before. But they stopped at the garage entrance, unable or unwilling to follow into the daylight beyond. As we sped away from the Archer building, my heart still racing, my palm still burning from whatever I'd done with the mark, I turned to Maria. "What? What was that? What's happening back there?" Maria's expression was grim. The beginning of an incursion, a major one from the sound of it. She looked at the others. "We need to convene the full circle. Tonight." Ray nodded, his eyes never leaving the road. "Already texted Catherine. She's alerting everyone on the eastern seaboard." I slumped back in my seat, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving me shaky and nauseated. Graves. They were turning him into some kind of human key, tattooing symbols all over his body. "The Watchers," Maria said, her voice hard. "They've found a new technique. Using human vessels not just as gateways, but as active keys to force junctions open permanently." "Can they do that?" I asked. "Create a permanent opening?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about one building, one junction point. This was something larger, more dangerous than I'd realized. The entities were evolving their tactics, the barriers were being tested in new ways, and I had just become a target for whatever was trying to break through. My first assignment as a key holder had become a baptism by fire, and from the grim expressions around me, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Part 10. The key holders convened that night in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath South Boston, a place that had once been part of a proposed extension to the MBTA system before funding ran out in the 1980s. The tunnel had been sealed off from public access, but the key holders maintained it as a secure meeting location, hidden from both ordinary eyes and the entity's awareness. Catherine had called in key holders from across the Northeast, nearly 30 in total, gathering in a circular chamber that had been intended as a station platform. Battery-powered lights cast long shadows across the curved walls, where the same angular symbols I was becoming familiar with had been carved directly into the concrete. I sat between Ray and Maria, feeling distinctly out of place among these seasoned guardians. Most were older, in their 40s or 50s at least, with the hard, watchful eyes of people who had seen too much. A few bore visible scars beyond their key marks, testaments to past encounters with the entities. Catherine stood at the center of the circle, her silver hair gleaming in the artificial light. "We face a crisis," she began without preamble. "The Watchers have developed a new technique for junction activation. They are using human vessels not merely as gateways, but as active keys. Living, conscious keys that can force open the barriers permanently. A murmur ran through the assembled key holders. This was clearly news to many of them. Daniel, Catherine continued, turning to me, witnessed this process firsthand today at the Archer Building. He observed Martin Graves undergoing the final stages of conversion. She nodded for me to speak. Feeling suddenly self-conscious, I described what I'd seen in the basement. The symbols painted on the walls and tattooed on Graves' body. The thinning section of reality behind him. The silver-haired entity guiding the process. The tattoos seemed to be stabilizing the opening, I concluded. Each new symbol made the light stronger, the barrier thinner. This aligns with what we've observed at other junction points, said a keyholder I didn't recognize. A tall black woman with close-cropped gray hair. In Chicago, we lost 3 blocks of the South Side to a similar event last month. The police report called it a gas explosion. It wasn't. Portland, too, added another keyholder. An office building downtown. 27 people missing, officially attributed to a structural collapse. But we know better. Catherine nodded grimly. The pattern is clear. The Watchers are coordinating these openings across multiple cities using the same conversion technique. The question is why now? What's changed? Could be the astronomical alignment, suggested Ray. The triple conjunction starts next week. The barrier's always thin during major celestial events. Or it could be that they've finally found willing candidates, Maria countered. The conversion process requires consent, at least initially. Graves agreed to become a key. He let them begin the transformation. Why would anyone agree to that? I asked. Especially once they understood what was really happening? Power, said Catherine simply. The Watchers offer knowledge, influence, wealth. And for those who go deeper into their organization, they offer communion with the entities. A false promise of transcendence. False? I pressed. So there's no reward for helping them? Catherine's expression was cold. The only reward is being consumed last, Daniel. The entities do not share power. They do not elevate humans. They feed. That is all they do. The Watchers who believe otherwise are deluded, manipulated by creatures far older and more cunning than they can comprehend. So what do we do? Asked a younger keyholder, perhaps the only person in the room close to my age. If they're opening multiple junction points simultaneously, we can't guard them all. We strike at the source, Catherine replied. The Watchers maintain a central location for each regional operation. For the Eastern Seaboard, that location is here in Boston, a converted church in Dorchester. It serves as their headquarters, their recruitment center, and their initiation site. She unfolded a large map on the floor at the center of the circle. It showed Boston and the surrounding areas, with various points marked in different colors. Red marks are confirmed junction points, Catherine explained. Blue are suspected but unconfirmed. Green are secured. Locations where we've established containment measures like Ray's factory. She pointed to a black mark in Dorchester. This is the Watcher headquarters. We believe they're planning a coordinated opening of multiple junction points during the triple conjunction next week. A chain reaction that would create a cascading collapse of the barriers across the entire Eastern Seaboard. The implications were horrifying. How many people would be affected, I asked. Affected? Catherine met my eyes directly. Everyone. Everything. If they succeed, there won't be barriers anymore. Not here, not anywhere. The entities would have free access to our world. So we stop them, said Ray, his voice hard. We've dealt with Watcher operations before. Not like this, Catherine cautioned. This is larger, more organized than previous attempts. They have at least 7 active conversion subjects in the Boston area alone. Graves is just one of them. We need to identify the others, said Maria. If they're following the same pattern as Graves, they'll be executives, people in positions of power, the kind who use car services. I suddenly understood why Catherine had placed me at Archer Financial. That's why you wanted me driving for them, to watch for signs among the executives. Yes, Catherine admitted, though we didn't anticipate how quickly things would escalate. We thought we had more time. Ray leaned forward. The client lists from these corporate car services could give us names, people with similar positions to Graves, similar profiles, potential targets for the Watchers. I can access Archer's system, I offered. I still have my credentials and they haven't been revoked yet. Catherine nodded. Do it. We need every name you can get. She turned to the assembled key holders. The rest of us need to prepare for direct intervention at the Watcher headquarters. We can't allow them to complete these conversions. What exactly does direct intervention mean? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Catherine. It means, she said slowly, that we're going to destroy their operation, by any means necessary. The meeting continued late into the night, with key holders reporting on suspicious activities across the city, sharing intelligence about Watcher movements, coordinating response teams. A plan began to take shape. A raid on the Watcher headquarters. Time to disrupt whatever ritual they had planned for the Triple Conjunction. I would play a role too. Using my position as a driver, I would help identify the other conversion subjects and, if possible, intercept them before they could be fully transformed into living keys. As the meeting wound down, key holders began to disperse in small groups, each with specific assignments. Ray, Maria, and I were among the last to leave, climbing up through an abandoned utility shaft that led to a nondescript parking lot above. Get some rest, Ray advised as we reached his truck. Tomorrow we start prepping for the raid. How am I supposed to rest after that? I asked, my mind still reeling from everything I'd learned. The barriers between worlds are collapsing, and we're planning what amounts to a paramilitary operation against a cult of dimensional cultists. Ray actually chuckled. Welcome to the life of a key holder, kid. The ordinary world never looks the same again. Maria placed a hand on my shoulder. He's right about the rest, though. You'll need your strength. The next few days will be intense. That was an understatement. Back in my apartment, I sat at my laptop, using my still-active credentials to access Archer Financial's booking system. I downloaded the client list, the driver assignments, the location history, anything that might help identify patterns, connections to other potential conversion subjects. As I scrolled through the data, certain names began to stand out. Executives who, like Graves, had recently changed their patterns, increased late-night visits to unusual locations, requests for specific drivers, abrupt schedule changes. I compiled a list of 7 names, sending it to Catherine along with my observations. Her response came quickly. Good work. 3 match our existing suspects. Meet at the Armory tomorrow, 10 a.m. Armory? What had I gotten myself into? Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of red doors and shifting symbols, of Graves with his tattooed body becoming something inhuman, of eyes watching me from every shadow. I awoke before dawn, my key mark throbbing with a dull ache. Something had changed overnight. I could feel it, a tension in the air, a pressure at the edges of my awareness. The barriers were thinning. The conjunction was approaching. The Armory turned out to be a repurposed auto repair shop in Somerville. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, no signage, chain link fence topped with rusty barbed wire. But inside was a different story. The main garage area had been converted into a training space, with mats on the floor and various weapons mounted on the walls. Not guns, I noticed, but more unusual implements. Knives with strange symbols etched into the blades, staves wrapped with copper wire, glass vials containing liquids of various colors. In a side room, workbenches were crowded with electronics. Modified phones like the one Eliza had given me, devices I couldn't begin to identify, components in various stages of assembly. Ray met me at the door, looking like he hadn't slept. Good, you're here. Catherine wants to start your training immediately. Training? For what exactly? For surviving what's coming, Ray said grimly. The mark gives you certain abilities, advantages, but you need to learn how to use them. Over the next several hours, I received a crash course in what it truly meant to be a key holder. The mark wasn't just a symbol or a scar. It was a conduit, a focus for what Catherine called boundary energy. The same force that maintained the separation between worlds could be channeled through the mark, used in various ways. What I'd done in the stairwell at the Archer building, Creating that high-pitched sound that drove back the entities was just one application. There were others, each requiring specific movements, words, intentions. Think of it like a key that works in multiple locks, Catherine explained, as she demonstrated a motion that created a brief, localized distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more pronounced. Different turns, different results. I practiced until my palm was red and inflamed around the key mark, until sweat soaked through my shirt, until I could reliably produce at least 3 different effects: the repelling sound, a small barrier of force, and a brief flash of light that Catherine said was particularly disorienting to the entities. "It's not much," she admitted as we took a break, "but it might keep you alive long enough to run away." "Encouraging," I muttered, gulping water from a bottle someone had handed me. "Would you prefer I lie?" Catherine's expression was stern but not unkind. "You've been a key holder for all of 5 minutes, Daniel. Most spend years developing these skills. You don't have years. You have days, maybe hours." She was right, of course. That evening, we received reports of 3 more junction points showing increased activity. The barriers were weakening faster than anticipated. The Watchers were accelerating their timetable. "We need to move," Catherine declared during an emergency meeting at the armory. "The raid happens tomorrow night. No more waiting." The plan was straightforward in concept, terrifying in execution. 3 teams would infiltrate the Watcher headquarters, an abandoned Catholic church they had converted for their purposes. Team 1 would secure the perimeter and deal with any human guards. Team 2 would locate and extract any conversion subjects being held there. Team 3, which included Ray, Maria, and reluctantly, me, would find and destroy the central ritual space where the Watchers were coordinating the junction activations. "Why am I on Team 3? I asked Ray as we prepared our equipment. "I'm the least experienced person here." "Because you've seen the conversion process up close," Ray explained. "You'll recognize the signs, the symbols, and because," he hesitated. "Because what?" Ray sighed. "Because new key holders have a certain resonance. The entities can sense it, are drawn to it. You're bait, essentially." "Great," I muttered. "Just great." "Look at it this way," Ray said, clapping me on the shoulder. "If something's trying to eat you, at least we know where the danger is." The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. I was fitted with body armor, lightweight plates, inscribed with the same protective symbols I'd seen during my binding ceremony. I was given a knife with a blade made of some strange dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Last resort only," Catherine warned as she handed it to me. "This isn't for fighting humans. It's for entities that have fully manifested in our world. The metal disrupts their connection to their home dimension." By nightfall, we were ready. 20 key holders, armed and armored, gathered in vehicles near the Watcher headquarters. Satellite images and drone footage had given us the layout. The main church building with its nave and sanctuary, plus a rectory and school building connected by covered walkways. Intelligence suggests at least 15 Watchers on site. Catherine briefed us. "Most will be human, but be prepared for at least some entity presence. The junction point is likely in the sanctuary, where the altar would have been." At precisely 10 p.m., we moved in. Team 1 went first, silent and efficient, neutralizing the perimeter guards with some kind of aerosol that rendered them unconscious almost instantly. Team 2 split off toward the school building, where thermal imaging had detected multiple heat signatures consistent with restrained subjects. Our team approached the main church doors. Ray took point, with Maria and I behind him, and 2 other key holders, Eliza and a man named Victor, covering our flanks. The doors were unlocked, which seemed too easy. "It's a trap," Maria whispered. "Of course it's a trap," Ray replied calmly. "They've known we were coming since Daniel escaped the Archer building. The question is, what kind of trap?" We were about to find out. As we entered the nave, the air inside felt wrong, heavy, resistant, like walking through water. The temperature dropped rapidly, our breath visible in clouds before our faces. The church had been desecrated in the most literal sense. The pews were gone. replaced by concentric circles of strange, angular runes carved directly into the wooden floor. The stained glass windows were covered with black cloth, and where the crucifix should have hung, a large symbol had been painted. The same circle with 3 vertical lines that marked the watchers. But it was what stood in place of the altar that made my blood run cold. A structure of metal and flesh, a framework that held 5 human bodies, or what had once been human bodies, arranged in a star pattern. Each was tattooed completely with the now familiar symbols. Their skin stretched tight over unnaturally elongated limbs, their heads hanging limply, yet their eyes open and aware, watching us enter. Among them, I recognized Graves. His transformation was complete. His body no longer resembled anything human, stretched and distorted into something that seemed more geometry than biology. His eyes tracked us as we moved, but they held no recognition, no humanity. Standing before this grotesque construction was the silver-haired entity I'd seen at the Archer building, still wearing its human disguise, though the edges seemed to blur and shift in the strange light. Beside him were 3 figures in hooded robes, their faces hidden, but their postures indicating they were still human. Watchers, presumably. "Welcome, keyholders," the silver-haired entity said, its voice somehow both mellifluous and grating. "You're just in time for the final act." Ray stepped forward, his key mark glowing faintly in the dimness. "This ends now. Whatever you're planning stops here." The entity's 2 wide smiles stretched impossibly further. "Oh, I don't think so. In fact, you've brought us exactly what we needed to complete the sequence." Its gaze shifted to me. A new key holder. Fresh. Resonant. Perfect. I felt a sudden pressure in my head, a tightening in my chest. The key mark on my palm burned white hot, sending searing pain up my arm. I gasped, dropping to one knee. "Daniel." Maria moved to help me, but was thrown back by an invisible force. "The conjunction begins in 17 minutes, the entity continued conversationally. "When it does, these living keys will turn simultaneously, opening junction points across the city. The barriers will fall, and my kind will walk freely in your world for the first time in millennia." Ray had recovered his balance and was slowly circling to the left, attempting to flank the entity. "Even if you succeed here, other keyholders will stop the other junctions. This is just one location." The entity laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "This is the source, keyholder. The other junctions are merely echoes. Control this one, control them all." It gestured toward me. "And thanks to your new recruit, we can complete our work ahead of schedule." The pressure in my head intensified. I felt something pulling at me, trying to drag me toward the grotesque altar. My feet began to slide across the floor, though I wasn't moving them. "Use the mark," Ray shouted. "The first pattern I showed you." Through a haze of pain, I remembered my training. I pressed my key mark against the floor and made a quick, twisting motion, mentally focusing on the idea of a lock engaging. The pressure stopped abruptly. I gasped in relief, staggering back to my feet. The entity's expression shifted to one of irritation. "Impressive," he learns quickly. It turned to the robed figures. "Begin the ritual." Now. The 3 watchers moved to equidistant points around the altar and began to chant their voices, creating a dissonant harmony that made my teeth ache. The tattooed bodies in the framework began to twitch and jerk, their limbs moving in unison despite their separate positions. "We need to stop the ritual," Maria urged, rejoining us. "Disrupt their focus." Ray nodded grimly. "Victor, Eliza, take out the watchers. Maria and I will deal with the entity." "Daniel." He hesitated. "Let me guess," I said. "Stay alive and try not to get possessed?" Ray actually grinned. "Something like that." They moved with the coordination of people who had trained together for years. Victor and Eliza sprinted toward the chanting watchers, their own key marks glowing as they channeled boundary energy. Maria and Ray approached the silver-haired entity from opposite sides, forcing it to divide its attention, which left me alone in the center of the nave, surrounded by the carved runes, feeling distinctly out of place and underprepared. The chanting was growing louder, more frenzied. The air in the church seemed to thicken further, taking on a strange opalescent quality, like oil on water. Through it, I could see the framework of bodies beginning to glow with the same shifting light I'd observed at the Archer Building's junction point. The barrier was thinning, right here, right now. I needed to do something. The others were engaged, fighting their assigned targets. No one was addressing the actual ritual, the framework of bodies that was serving as the living key. Acting on instinct, I pulled out the strange metal knife Catherine had given me and ran toward the altar. If these bodies were the key, perhaps damaging them would disrupt the mechanism. I was halfway there when a force slammed into me from the side, sending me sprawling across the rune-carved floor. I looked up to see one of the robed watchers standing over me, hood fallen back to reveal a woman's face, young, pretty, and utterly mad with fervor. "Sacrifice," she hissed, raising a curved ceremonial dagger. "The final offering?" I rolled away just as the dagger came down, embedding itself in the wooden floor where my chest had been a moment before. The watcher yanked it free, advancing on me again. "Your blood will open the way," she intoned, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Your death will be honored in the new world." "Hard pass," I muttered, scrambling to my feet. I pressed my key mark against a nearby wooden column, activating the pattern for the repelling sound. The high-pitched keening filled the air. The watcher staggered back, hands clapped over her ears, the dagger clattering to the floor. I kicked it away and ran for the altar again. This time, I made it. Up close, the framework was even more horrifying. A fusion of metal struts and human bodies, the flesh stretching and warping to accommodate the unnatural positions. Graves and the other 4 victims were barely recognizable as human anymore, their skin completely covered in the glowing symbols, their joints dislocated and reformed to create the star pattern. Where should I strike? What would disrupt the ritual without killing what remained of these people? They were victims too, manipulated and transformed against their will, or at least beyond what they had truly consented to. As I hesitated, the light emanating from the tattooed symbols grew blindingly bright. The chanting reached a fever pitch. I could feel the air itself beginning to part, like curtains being drawn back to reveal something waiting behind them. Time was up. I had to act. I raised the dark metal knife and plunged it not into any of the bodies, but into the central point where the framework connected, the hub of the star formation. As the blade made contact, there was a sound like reality itself tearing, a discordant shriek that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The framework shuddered. The glowing symbols flickered. And then, to my horror, the bodies began to speak. All 5 simultaneously, in perfect unison, their voices overlapping to create a single, resonant tone. The key turns. The door opens. The way is prepared. Around us, the air rippled and tore. Through the widening gaps, I caught glimpses of something else. Not darkness, not light, but an absence that somehow had form, had intent. Limbs that weren't limbs, eyes that weren't eyes, mouths that weren't mouths. Entities far larger, far more alien than the silver-haired thing that had been directing the ritual. They were coming through. We had failed. And then I heard Catherine's voice, cutting through the chaos. The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands. She stood in the doorway of the church, flanked by the rest of the key holders. All of them had their marked palms raised, all glowing with the same silvery light. As one, they repeated the phrase, "The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands." The tears in reality stuttered, began to close. The framework of bodies contorted, fighting against some invisible force. The silver-haired entity shrieked in rage, its human disguise falling away completely to reveal something insectoid and skeletal, with too many limbs and too many eyes. The key holders advanced into the nave, still chanting in unison. The power of their combined marks created a wave of boundary energy that I could actually see. A rippling front of silvery light that pushed back the tears in reality, sealed them shut one by one. I staggered away from the altar as the framework began to collapse, the metal struts twisting and breaking, the transformed bodies falling limp. The runes carved into the floor were burning now, smoking and blackening, as if subjected to intense heat. The silver-haired entity, no longer remotely human in appearance, made one last, desperate lunge toward the altar, toward the knife I had embedded in its center. Ray intercepted it, driving his own blade deep into what passed for the creature's torso. The entity's shriek was deafening, painful. It thrashed wildly, its limbs elongating and contracting, its form losing coherence. And then, like a balloon bursting, it simply collapsed, its substance folding in on itself until nothing remained but a small dark stain on the wooden floor. The church fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere dissipated, replaced by the smell of smoke and a metallic tang I recognized as blood. Around us, the remaining watchers had either fled or been subdued by Team 1, who now secured the perimeter of the sanctuary. I looked toward the altar. The framework had completely collapsed, the 5 bodies lying in a tangled heap among the twisted metal. To my shock, I saw movement. Graves was twitching, his chest rising and falling in labored breaths. He was alive. They all were. "They'll need specialized care," Catherine said, following my gaze. "The transformation can't be fully reversed, but we can help them adjust, learn to live with the changes." I turned to her, 100 questions racing through my mind. "What about the other junction points? The conjunction?" "Neutralized," she replied. "When you disrupted the source, it created a cascading effect. The other sites lost their focus." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did well for your first major operation." I wasn't sure well was the right word. I'd stumbled through mostly on instinct and dumb luck. But we had stopped the ritual. We had prevented whatever mass incursion the Watchers and their entity allies had planned. It should have felt like victory. So why did the knot in my stomach only tighten? "This isn't over, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Catherine's expression was grim. "No. This was one battle in a war that's been going on for centuries. The entities are patient. The Watchers are fanatical. They'll try again. And we'll be waiting," Ray said, joining us. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, but otherwise seemed intact. "That's what keyholders do. We watch, we wait, we fight when necessary." Maria approached, supporting a shaken-looking Eliza. "Team 2 reports success. 7 captives recovered. All alive, though 3 were in early stages of conversion." "Get them to the safe house," Catherine ordered. "Standard detox protocol." As the keyholders moved methodically through the church, securing prisoners, recovering evidence, treating the injured, I found myself standing alone near the collapsed altar. The dark metal knife I'd used was still embedded in the central hub, vibrating slightly as if reacting to some energy only it could detect. I reached for it, intending to remove it from the wreckage. "I wouldn't," said a voice behind me. I turned to find an elderly keyholder I'd seen at the gathering but hadn't been introduced to. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Why not?" I asked. "Because it's absorbed something from the framework, something that shouldn't be allowed to spread." She nodded to 2 other keyholders who approached with what looked like a lead box. "We'll contain it properly." As they carefully extracted the knife and sealed it in the box, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly it had absorbed. What essence or energy from the other side might now reside in that dark metal? The cleanup operation continued through the night. By dawn, the church had been completely sanitized, all evidence of the ritual removed, all runes erased, all captives and injured evacuated. To anyone looking in from outside, it would appear empty, abandoned, unremarkable. Just another forgotten building in a city full of them. Just another threshold, closed and locked once more. For now. Finally. 3 days after the raid on the Watcher headquarters, I found myself back behind the wheel of an Uber. Not because I needed the money anymore. The keyholders provided a stipend for active members, but because driving was now part of my duty. Moving thresholds, Catherine had explained. Eyes on the streets. First line of detection for new entity activity. It felt surreal to be picking up ordinary passengers again, making small talk about the weather or traffic, while being acutely aware of the other reality that existed alongside the mundane world. I checked each passenger carefully, looking for the telltale signs of entity possession, the too wide smile, the reflective eyes, the unnatural cadence of speech. But most were just people, regular humans going about their lives, blissfully unaware of the barriers that protected them, of the entities that would gladly consume them, of the silent war being fought in the shadows of the city. I followed all 20 rules religiously now, understanding their importance in a way I hadn't before. I avoided tunnels after midnight, never stopped at deserted red lights, kept my phone to myself, took seemingly random right turns when the pattern of traffic suggested entity presence. The key mark on my palm had faded to a silvery scar once more, inactive until needed. The medallion ray had given me hung from my rearview mirror, disguised as a simple good luck charm, but serving as both warning and protection. Life developed a new routine: driving shifts, training sessions at the armory, meetings with other key holders to share information, coordinate patrols, maintain vigilance over known junction points. I was assigned to Maria's cell, a small group of key holders who monitored a specific section of the city. We met weekly in a safe house to compare notes, report suspicious activities, and practice the increasingly complex boundary energy manipulations that Catherine was teaching us. My abilities were growing, my connection to the key mark strengthening. I could now generate the repelling sound without touching a solid surface. I could create a barrier that would hold for several minutes. I could sense the subtle wrongness in the air that indicated entity presence or junction point activation. But despite our victory at the church, the atmosphere among the key holders remained tense. Reports from other cities suggested the Watchers were regrouping, adapting their tactics. Several known junction points showed increased activity. The triple conjunction had passed, but other astronomical alignments were approaching. Different opportunities for the barriers to thin. And then there were the disappearances. 3 key holders from the New York cell vanished within a week, 2 more in Philadelphia, 1 in Providence. All experienced guardians, all without a trace. They're hunting us specifically now, Catherine explained during an emergency gathering. The entities have identified key holders as their primary obstacle. They're becoming more strategic, more focused in their attacks. We increased our security protocols. No key holder traveled alone if it could be avoided. Safe houses were moved, communication channels encrypted, recognition signals changed. But the sense of being watched, of being hunted, remained. I felt it especially while driving, a prickling awareness of eyes on me, of attention from something not human. Sometimes I would catch glimpses in my rearview mirror of passengers who hadn't been there a moment before, who disappeared when I turned to look directly. One night, about 2 weeks after the raid, I was finishing a late shift. My last passenger dropped off around 1 a.m. I was heading home, carefully avoiding tunnels and deserted intersections, when my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, as usual. Emergency at Junction 17. All available. Key holders respond. Possible breakthrough in progress. Junction 17 was Ray's factory. The place with the red door. My stomach clenched with dread as I changed direction, heading toward the industrial area where I'd first learned about the key holders and their mission. As I approached, I could see something was very wrong. The windows of the factory glowed with the same strange, shifting light I'd seen during the ritual at the church. The air around the building seemed to waver and distort, like heat mirages on summer pavement. I parked a block away and approached cautiously, the medallion clutched in one hand, my key mark tingling with proximity to an active junction point. Other vehicles were already there. I recognized Ray's pickup truck and Maria's sedan among them. The side door I'd used on my first visit stood ajar, but no light spilled out from it now. The interior of the factory was dark, except for the pulsing, otherworldly glow coming from the far end, from the direction of the red door. I stepped inside, moving quietly through the familiar space. The machinery that Ray had said maintained the boundary, strengthened the locks, was silent and still. No hum, no mechanical clank. Just eerie, complete silence. As I approached the center of the factory floor, I began to make out shapes in the darkness. People standing motionless among the quiet machines. Key holders, I assumed, waiting for instructions or assessing the situation. "Ray?" I called softly. "Maria? It's Daniel." No response. The figures didn't move, didn't turn toward my voice. A new kind of dread settled in my gut. I activated my key mark, creating a small, localized light. One of the newer techniques Catherine had taught me. In its silvery glow, I could finally see the motionless figures clearly. They were key holders indeed. Ray, Maria, Eliza, and 3 others I recognized from the raid. But they weren't waiting or assessing. They were frozen. Suspended in postures of struggle or flight, their faces locked in expressions of shock or horror. Ray had his knife drawn, arm pulled back to strike at something no longer there. Maria was half-turned as if to run. Eliza had both hands raised, her key mark glowing faintly on her palm. They looked like statues, perfect in detail but completely immobile. When I touched Ray's arm, the fabric of his jacket felt stiff, unyielding, as if turned to stone or plastic. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. My light revealed something else. A trail of dark, viscous liquid leading from the frozen key holders toward the far end of the factory, toward the red door. The liquid moved slightly, rippling in a way that suggested it wasn't flowing due to gravity, but crawling with purpose. I followed it, keeping a safe distance, the light from my key mark casting long shadows across the factory floor. The machinery lay broken and scattered, as if something had torn through it in a frenzy. The protective measures Ray had established, destroyed. And then I saw the red door. It stood wide open. Beyond it was not another room, not a wall, not anything that belonged in our reality. Instead, there was a shifting, roiling landscape of impossible geometries and colors that hurt to look at directly. Shapes moved within it, things with too many angles, too many dimensions. The air around the doorway rippled and distorted, reality itself protesting the violation of its laws. Standing in front of the open door was a figure I recognized with a jolt of horror, Richard. Or rather, the entity that had taken Richard's form. He looked the same as when I'd met him in the bookstore. Silver hair, pale eyes, gaunt face. But now there was no pretense of humanity in his posture or expression. He stood unnaturally still, head cocked at an angle no human neck could achieve, that too wide smile stretching his face. "Daniel," he said, his voice, both Richard's and something else layered beneath it. "How good of you to join us. I was hoping you would answer the summons." I realized with sickening clarity that the text message hadn't been from the key holders at all. It had been a trap, and I had walked right into it. "What did you do to them?" I demanded, gesturing toward the frozen key holders. "Temporal displacement," Richard replied casually. "They exist. Elsewhere now." A moment stretched into eternity. "Don't worry. They aren't suffering. They aren't experiencing anything at all." "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I assessed escape routes, options, anything that might help me survive this encounter. Richard smiled wider, impossibly wider. "The same thing we have always wanted. Passage, access, freedom to enter your world as we once did, before the key holders and their locks. And you think I'll help you with that? After everything I've seen?" "Oh, you misunderstand," Richard said, taking a step toward me. "We don't need your cooperation, just your resonance, your key mark. Fresh, new, potent." He inhaled deeply, as if savoring a scent. "The recently bound are so much more energetic, so much more useful." Behind him, the shapes in the doorway seemed to press closer, reaching toward our reality with appendages that made no physical sense. The dark, viscous liquid on the floor began to move more rapidly, flowing around my feet, encircling me. I activated my key mark again, generating the repelling sound. The liquid recoiled momentarily, but then continued its advance. Richard didn't even flinch. "Crude techniques," he commented. "Catherine always was a limited teacher. so focused on defense, on maintenance, never understanding the true potential of the key marks. "And I suppose you're going to tell me what that true potential is?" I said, stalling, my mind racing for a solution, an escape, anything. Richard's smile never faltered. "Better than that, I'm going to show you." He moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance between us before I could react. His hand closed around my wrist, cold and dry and too strong. Pain lanced up my arm as he forced my key mark against his own. A mirror image of the keyholder symbol, but inverted. Wrong. The contact created a surge of boundary energy unlike anything I'd experienced before. The factory disappeared around us, replaced by a kaleidoscopic vision of other places, other realities, flashing by too quickly to comprehend. I saw cities both familiar and alien, landscapes both beautiful and horrifying, beings both recognizable and utterly, terrifyingly other. And I saw the barriers, not as abstract concepts, but as tangible structures, vast walls of energy stretching between worlds, punctuated by locks that glowed with the same silvery light as my key mark. Some were intact, solid. Others were thin, weakened. A few had small tears or holes through which things were already beginning to slip. "Do you see now?" Richard's voice echoed around me. "The locks are failing, have been failing for centuries. What the keyholders do is merely delay the inevitable." The vision shifted, focusing on a specific lock. Large, elaborate, located in what seemed to be the heart of Boston. It glowed brighter than the others. Newer, stronger. "The master lock," Richard explained. "Created during the founding of the city, maintained by generations of keyholders, the linchpin that holds the regional barrier network together." I watched in horror as the vision showed the master lock beginning to crack, to fail. As it did, the surrounding barriers collapsed in a cascading failure, opening the way for a flood of entities to pour through into our world. "This is what's coming," Richard continued. "Not because of anything the Watchers do, not because of rituals or conjunctions, but because the locks themselves are inherently flawed. They were never meant to last forever." The vision faded, and we were back in the factory. Richard still gripping my wrist, the red door still open behind him, the frozen keyholders still suspended in their moments of terror. "Why show me this?" I gasped, the pain in my arm intensifying as Richard's grip tightened. "Because you have a choice, Daniel," he replied. "You can continue with the keyholders, fighting a losing battle, maintaining locks that will inevitably fail. Or you can join us. Help us manage the transition. Ensure that when the barriers fall, as they must, it happens in a way that preserves some of your world, some of humanity." "You're talking about surrender," I spat. "I'm talking about survival," Richard countered. "The choice isn't between invasion and safety anymore. That window closed long ago. The choice now is between catastrophic collapse and controlled integration." I could feel something changing in my key mark, where it pressed against Richard's inverted symbol. A corruption spreading through the silvery scar, darkening it, altering its resonance. "You're lying," I said through gritted teeth. "This is just another trick to get me to open more doors for you." Richard sighed, a surprisingly human sound. "I expected better from you, Daniel. More adaptability. But I see you've fully embraced Catherine's dogma." He released my wrist suddenly. "No matter. We have what we need." Before I could react, he turned back toward the red door. From the shifting, impossible space beyond, something was emerging. A mass of writhing darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It flowed across the threshold like liquid, but it moved with purpose, with intelligence. "The advance guard," Richard said, his voice reverent. "The first of many, the beginning of the end." The mass took shape, forming into something vaguely humanoid but wrong in every detail. Limbs too numerous and jointed in impossible places. A head that was not a head, but a cluster of sensory organs I couldn't comprehend. Where eyes might have been on a human, this thing had pulsing voids that seemed to pull at my vision, my consciousness. "They will soften the boundaries," Richard continued. "Prepare the way for the greater entities. Make your world compatible." The thing the advance guard, began to move toward me, flowing rather than walking, leaving trails of that same dark, viscous liquid on the floor. Behind it, more shapes were forming in the doorway, more entities preparing to cross. I had to act, had to stop this. But how? I was alone, outmatched, facing creatures from beyond reality itself. The key mark on my palm burned, but differently now. Not with the clean silver energy I'd come to know, but with something darker, tainted by Richard's touch. I looked at it and saw with horror that the symbol was changing, the clean lines of the key distorting, twisting into something that resembled Richard's inverted mark. No, I wouldn't let this happen. I wouldn't be corrupted. Wouldn't be used as a tool to destroy everything the key holders fought to protect. With a supreme effort of will, I focused on the mark, on what it truly represented, not just a symbol, but a commitment, a purpose, a choice I had made freely. "The key turns," I whispered, remembering the words from the church, from the ceremony that had bound me. "The lock holds, the boundary stands." The pain in my palm intensified, became almost unbearable, but I kept repeating the words, kept focusing on their meaning, their intent. The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands. The corruption began to recede, the darkened portions of the key mark brightening, returning to their silver glow. As they did, I felt a surge of boundary energy building within me, different from anything I'd channeled before. Not just defensive, but active, aggressive. Richard noticed the change. His too wide smile faltered for the first time. "What are you doing?" he demanded, taking a step toward me. I didn't answer. I was too focused on the energy building in the mark, on directing it, shaping it. With a final surge of will, I thrust my marked palm toward the red door and released everything I had been holding. The key turns, the lock holds, the boundary stands. The energy exploded outward in a wave of blinding silver light. It struck the advancing entity, the shapes in the doorway, Richard himself. The entity screeched, a sound that existed on multiple frequencies at once, painful to hear. Richard's form rippled, his human disguise momentarily falling away to reveal something insectoid and ancient behind it. But it was the door that took the brunt of the energy. The red wood shuddered, the symbols on its surface flaring with uncomfortable light. The impossible space beyond seemed to contract, to pull away from our reality. "No!" Richard's voice was no longer human, no longer singular. It was a chorus of rage and frustration. "You can't close it. Not alone. Not without the machinery, the patterns." But the door was closing, slowly, fighting against whatever forces Richard and his kind had employed to open it, but definitely closing. The space beyond was receding, the entities retreating or being pulled back. Richard lunged at me, his form shifting with each movement, human features melting into something else entirely. I dodged, barely, and released another pulse of boundary energy directly at him. This time, he screamed. His body, or what passed for it, convulsed, portions of it seeming to fold into themselves, collapse inward. He fell to his knees, no longer human, no longer solid, a mass of shifting parts and textures. "This changes. Nothing," he gasped, his voice fracturing into multiple overlapping tones. "The locks, still failing. The barriers, still weakening. We will return." With a final, terrible sound that wasn't quite a scream, he collapsed entirely, his substance seeming to evaporate, to unravel, until nothing remained but a dark stain on the factory floor. Similar to what had happened to the entity at the church. The red door slammed shut, with a finality that echoed through the factory. The symbols on its surface flared once more, then settled back to their usual indecipherable patterns. Behind me, I heard movement. I turned to see the frozen key holders beginning to animate, their stiffened postures relaxing, their expressions shifting from horror to confusion. Whatever temporal displacement Richard had subjected them to was breaking down with his defeat. Ray was the first to fully recover, stumbling slightly as he regained control of his body. Daniel? What? What happened? Before I could answer, Maria gasped, pointing toward the red door. The machines! The containment system! I looked around, seeing the destruction with fresh eyes. The machinery that maintained the barriers, that kept the door locked, smashed, torn apart, beyond repair. We need to call Catherine, Ray said, his voice urgent. Get a containment team here, now. As Ray made the call, I sank to the floor, suddenly exhausted. The key mark on my palm ached, but it was a clean pain now, the silver light pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I had pushed it beyond anything I'd been taught, channeled more energy than I'd known I could access. Maria knelt beside me, her face concerned. Are you okay? What did you do? I shook my head, not sure how to explain. I closed the door, somehow, and Richard, or whatever was using his form, he's gone. Gone? Maria looked at the dark stain on the floor, then back at me with new respect in her eyes. You banished an entity? Alone? That shouldn't be possible for a new key holder. I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't understand it myself. All I knew was that I had done what needed to be done, used the key mark in a way that had felt instinctual, necessary. The containment team arrived within the hour, Catherine at its head, along with a dozen other key holders I hadn't met before. They brought equipment, tools, components that looked like replacements for the destroyed machinery. Catherine took one look at me, still sitting on the floor, and at the dark stain nearby, and her expression shifted from concern to something like awe. You closed the door, she said, kneeling to examine my key mark. And you banished one of them. This is unprecedented. He showed me things, I said, my voice hoarse. The barriers, the locks, something called the master lock in Boston. He said they're failing, have been failing for centuries. That what we do is just delay the inevitable. Catherine's expression hardened. Of course he did. They want us to give up, to surrender, to make their invasion easier. She stood, helping me to my feet. But what you did tonight proves they're wrong. The boundaries can be maintained, the locks can hold, and entities can be forced back across the threshold. Around us, the containment team was already at work, setting up temporary measures to secure the junction point, beginning repairs on the damaged machinery. Will it be enough? I asked, watching them work. Without the original machinery? It will have to be, Catherine replied grimly. This is one of our strongest containment sites. We can't abandon it. She looked at me appraisingly. And now we know something new, something important. What's that? That the key marks themselves might be more powerful than we realized. That perhaps we've been limiting ourselves, thinking too defensively. Her eyes gleamed with a kind of fierce pride. You've shown us something tonight, Daniel. Something that might change how we fight this war. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. All I knew was that I'd faced something from beyond reality and survived. I'd closed a door that should have remained closed. I'd protected the world from entities that would consume it without thought or mercy. And in doing so, I'd finally, truly understood what it meant to be a keyholder. Not just a guardian of locks, not just a follower of rules, but a living key. One that could turn both ways, that could open or close the boundaries between worlds. As the containment team continued their work, Ray approached me, a bandage now covering the cut on his arm where he'd been frozen mid-strike. So, he said, his voice casual but his eyes serious. Ready for your next driving shift? After all this excitement? I laughed, a short, slightly hysterical sound. You're kidding, right? Ray shook his head. The job doesn't change, Daniel. We still watch. We still wait. We still drive the moving thresholds. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Only now we know a little more about what we're up against, and they know a little more about what we can do. He was right, of course. Nothing had really changed, not in the broader scheme. The entities were still trying to break through. The Watchers were still helping them. The barriers were still under threat. But something had changed in me. I had seen the barriers, the locks, the true nature of what we were fighting. I had used the key mark in a way that even Catherine seemed surprised by. And I had made my choice. Not just to follow the rules, not just to be a key holder, but to actively fight for the world I called home. Yeah? I said, straightening up. I guess I am ready for my next shift. Because that's what we did. We drove, we watched, we guarded the thresholds. And sometimes, when necessary, we faced the darkness directly and pushed it back, one ride at a time.